Good afternoon. I'd like to call the July 15th, 2014 City Council meeting to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Francisco.
Here.
Hart. Hotchkiss. Murillo.
Here.
Rouse. Here. White. Here. Mayor Schneider.
Here. Are there any changes to the agenda?
There are none, Madam Mayor.
Okay, so public comment. I have 2 minutes here up at the podium. We'll start with Clint Orr, to be followed by Kenneth Locke. Good afternoon.
Hi, gang. Mayor Schneider, council members, Clint Orr. I intend to have the resources in hand to complete the tenant improvements with resources to continue operations to open the airport honky-tonk within 6 weeks. So that's the end of August. I hope that you bear with me and don't rent it until then without, let me know or something. We don't seek to have any subsidization. I know that Mr. Hart had mentioned that it's airport property, and you can't have any kind of like subsidies for nonprofits or any other reason in that property, and that's not the intent of the corporation, the California Country Dance Foundation. Our intention is to pay fair market value and to open and to actually be of benefit to the community and to actually drive people to that location. We might have at some point some Western wear, maybe something for the kids and so forth. So the intention is to put in a little bit of a theme park in there. I know it sounds far-fetched, but it might be ideal for the vacant properties in your possession to provide a little bit of income and some something for the community. So anyway, that's it. I just want to let you know that I'm still pressing very diligently. I'm meeting with Assemblyman Williams on this issue here in the next 4 or 5 days. I've been speaking to it with the Montecito Association about opening on Coast Village Road, the state headquarters. I'm definitely working very diligently on this, and hopefully we can get some constructive documentation here in the next 6 weeks so we can move forward if it's conceivable. So just letting you know that I'm on it, and hopefully we can get this thing up and running, and it'll be an asset to the community. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you. Kenneth Locke will be followed by Phil Walker.
My name is Kenneth Locke. Just had kind of something come to me today that I thought I'd bring to your attention, just some insight into this when it comes to tennis in the community, a renaissance, a renewal for tennis. And what came to me was the idea of the kind of the Christian concept of the Holy Spirit. And I actually can connect that whole concept to what we can understand as, the holistic spirit, and what it means to be holistic and then spiritual and then Holy Spirit type of situation. Now, my practice, I was just down at the municipal court sitting against the wall just about a half hour ago or so, and my practice is actually develop both of my arms and be able to hit forehands, backhand serve, and just develop this holistic oneness, which I've been kind of preaching since I've been kind of in this town for the past dozen years or so. And so it's just kind of interesting, that connection. And then the baptism kind of situation where a person becomes baptized by the Holy Spirit, purified, renewed. And then right now I'm sorry to have to say that tennis hasn't been holistically healthy. And I'm the first teacher who can actually bring a person over to holistic health. And then upon their baptism, then they'll have just basic requirements to develop this and then recognize the teacher type of situation. As I mentioned, I think like last week or week before about interdisciplinary, once we have a reference to, say, an athletic discipline in relation to being holistically healthy, then we can actually cross-reference it over to other disciplines like baseball and golf and swimming and realize actually the nature of how also those disciplines aren't promoting holistic health. And I'm hopeful that just raises the consciousness of the community. Thank you.
Phil Walker will be followed by William Connell.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor Schneider and members of the City Council. You know, a few weeks back, Councilman Hart made a very good point vis-a-vis fences, walls, hedges, and screens. He said, we have to do the best we can to manage an unmanageable situation, essentially. And that's the way I see it, having done some research trying to find comparable 5-foot chain link fences. The animal ain't out there. Very, very, very few are permitted throughout this city. And, you know, if they had had a permit tracking contract with ASILA, I guess, for land development permit tracking, morphed into fences, walls, screens, and hedges 30 years ago, hey, I would have got one. But the whole point, if you're not aware, I guess ignorance is a problem. So, you know, and another thing I see today is the multi-use concept of the sidewalk. Look, over in the neighborhood recently, this gentleman took remember the go-karts to the next level. It was like a rocket sled, unbelievable. You know, down about here, and he sort of reclined. It was motorized, and talk about speed and danger, but you got to make fences survivable, for the vehicles that transit the sidewalks, let alone people. Thank you.
William Connell will be followed by Connie Spate.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, City Council. My name's Bill Connell. I'm from Carpinteria, and for 20 years, I've held a business license in Santa Barbara. I've done countless events. I've donated to as many nonprofits as I possibly could have. I talked to you about the 4th of July celebration. There was a complete disconnect between the Sparkle Group and the Parks and Recreation Group. It cost all of the vendors dearly. No entertainment during the afternoon right after the parade. We sat around and looked at each other for a long time. When we did get busy, other illegal vendors with trailers filled of water and soda who had been circulating all around were picking our vendor at the end of our group. And there's never a cop around when you need one, nor at that time I was too busy. However, I did put a lot of product back. Tinkers, likewise. The other individuals were quite disappointed on just a lack of cohesiveness and what we had come to expect from this city for a 4th of July celebration. The band on the beach, a lot of people coming down after the parade to look at the helicopters, to use our Veterans Hall. I realize there's a lot of dynamics in place. You have to take a little interest in this special event, as it did not come up to the standard that Santa Barbara is known for. I'm not bitching, I'm not moaning. I'm telling you it was wrong. There was a lot of underlying individual things I shan't go into. I appreciate for your time, but the first way to correct an issue is to be brought into there is an issue.
Thank you.
So I appreciate your time very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Connie Spate, and please correct me if I mispronounced, followed by Denise Irma Salazar, and then Ethan.
No, you're one of the few that pronounced it right.
Okay.
Madam Mayor and council members, I'm here because of water. We're all exceedingly concerned about it. I'm a native Southern Californian. I've been through 2 fires. I live up at the foot of Gibraltar. I'm very well aware, and when I drive through places like San Roque, and I see 99% of the houses have green lawns, it personally is very offensive to me. I don't think the city is getting the message out strongly enough. I have seen publicity about it, but I don't think it's been strong enough. I don't think your fines are coming into activity quick enough and strong enough. People have to be hit over the head sometimes with things. Is the city issuing building permits? Are they?
We finish your comments and we can follow up at that
Oh,
point.
okay, because I don't think that they should be. Also, I wanted to ask, what you're calling the recycle facility, is that the desalination plant? Are they one and the same? All right,
No,
that's what I wanted
actually,
to know.
sorry.
And,
Finish your comments and then we'll. Sorry, go ahead.
And as far as water companies tapping into sources that are not theirs, I know they'd be difficult to catch, but why aren't these companies that say they'll bring you water have permits to do so, and then you can follow up on the permits? Why are some of these things falling through the cracks? We need to really screw down this whole situation tight. It's not good. I don't know how many of you have driven around Santa Barbara. You're going to see green lawns everywhere. And I'm worried. I've lived in countries where you had a hole in the ground for your toilet, and we could possibly come to where we can't flush. We can't shower. I don't think that the city council, whoever, is taking a strong enough, fast enough step.
Thank
I
you.
just want to say that.
Thank
you.
Thank you. Just to answer, the recycling facility, water, and the desal plant are two different things, and that information's on the website. The Stage 2 does also still allows for building permits, as I believe there's building permits throughout the South Coast right now. That could change in the future, but as of now, there's no moratorium. So, Denise Irma Salazar is next. Come on up. Okay. And Ethan.
Hi, I don't expect to take 2 full minutes, but just a couple areas of concern. For domestic security risk, we currently have on the agenda and being installed now 911 dispatch to be perched above the bike station yards away from the administrative building. This is being moved from the bomb shelter or the basement at the police department, and I'm wondering if this could be reevaluated. I believe that when this had been passed, the mayor happened to be absent, and whether this could be reviewed again. Another question I have, this is domestic security risk. And another question I have is in regards to our water shortage. And the blight that we have is that we are not having fountains on. And even during times of blight, a fountain running helps ecologically with the birds and the mites and the worms that otherwise also impact us as a health concern. This has been a strategy civically, way back from before the Romans, and being that we also now with modern technological standards with chlorine or what have you, bromine in water, very helpful for the birds. So during this time, even if we're not watering our lawns, if we could be still allowed to run our fountains, our water fountains, that could be most helpful. So those are my 2 issues, 911 dispatch on above the bike station as well as the use of the mechanisms of these fountains. Thank you very much.
That concludes public comment, so we'll move on to the consent calendar, and you have some items to read.
Item 1, adoption of ordinance for lease agreement with Goleta Building Materials Incorporated, recommending that council adopt by reading of title only an ordinance of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara approving and authorizing the airport director to execute a 10-year lease agreement with 1 5-year option with Goleta Building Materials Incorporated, a California corporation, effective August 14, 2014, for a monthly rental of $10,698 exclusive of utilities. Item 2, introduction of ordinance for 2014 to 2017 Fire Association Memorandum of Understanding, recommending that Council A, ratify the Memorandum of Understanding between the City and the Santa Barbara City Firefighters Association for the period of July 1, 2014 to December 31, 2017 through introduction and subsequent adoption of, by reading of title only, An ordinance of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara adopting the 2014 to 2017 Memorandum of Understanding between the City of Santa Barbara and the Santa Barbara City Firefighters Association. B, adopt by reading of title only a resolution of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara for paying and reporting the value of employer-paid member contributions for Firefighters Association employees effective January 10, 2015. And C, adopt by reading of title only a resolution of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara for paying and reporting the value of employer-paid member contributions for Firefighters Association employees effective January 9, 2016. Item 3, grant application for the Environmental Enhancement and Mitigation Program for the Arroyo Burro restoration of Barger Canyon. Recommending that Council adopt by reading of title only a resolution of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara authorizing the Parks and Recreation Director or designee to submit a grant application for grant funds from the Environmental Enhancement and Mitigation Program for the Arroyo Burro restoration of Barger Canyon. Item 4, resolutions authorizing execution of 2 grant agreements with the State of California for stormwater infiltration projects and acceptance of grant funds totaling $3,458,640, including recommendations A, that Council adopt by reading of title only a resolution of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara authorizing the Parks and Recreation Director or designee to negotiate and execute an agreement and any amendments thereto with the State of California for the City of Santa Barbara Low Impact Development Streets, Sidewalks, and Alleys project. And D, that Council adopt by reading of title only a resolution of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara authorizing the Public Works Director or designee to negotiate and execute an agreement and any amendments thereto with the State of California for the Laguna Lot Infiltration Paver project. And item 5, corrected city fee resolution, recommending that Council adopt by reading of title only a resolution of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara correcting the establishment of certain city fees and rescinding a portion of resolution number 14045.
Thank you. Without further objection, we'll waive further readings. Any item to be taken off, or is there a motion to approve the consent calendar?
Item number
Move, Madam Mayor.
4. Just item number 4.
Item 4?
Yeah.
So before, we'll get to the motion just a second. This is the item for the stormwater infiltration projects and accepted grant funds. Go ahead, Mr. Hart?
Just wanted to draw attention to it specifically. I think it's a tremendous success story. They made significant grant acquisition from the state for some really innovative projects, and just wanted to congratulate the Creeks Division for a job well done.
Okay, so you don't need to vote on it separately then. Okay, so we have a motion for the consent calendar and a second. All in favor? Aye. That was a very quiet aye, but it was a unanimous one. Okay, thank you very much. Item number, we had a lot there. Item number 21.
Parks and Recreation 2014 to 2015 Strategic Drought Response Plan.
Thank you, Ms. Rapp.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Nancy Rapp, Parks and Recreation Director, and we are very pleased to bring you the outcome of our Parks and Recreation staff, our effort over the last few months. We've been very concerned about the drought conditions, and of course we are in response mode for both the Stage 1 and now Stage 2 drought declaration in our community. I do have some staff that are with me, and I wanted to introduce them so that if you have specific questions as we go through the presentation, we can address them directly. So with me is Parks Manager Santos Escobar, Mark Sewell, who is our business analyst with the golf course and the Parks and Recreation Department as a whole, Simone Herrera, who is our golf course superintendent, and Rich Hanna, our senior recreation supervisor over all of our aquatic facilities amongst his other responsibilities. And also in the room is Jill Zachary. So today we'll be talking, giving you an overview of the plan, but we'll be concluding with our progress to date. So I'll be covering the plan considerations as well as each of the specific areas that are addressed in detail in the plan. I wanted to start with a slide that showed an overview of how Parks and Recreation uses our water. And you can see that 49% of our water use is in our parks, and 47% is at the golf course. The smallest percentage, 4%, is recreation, which is primarily our recreation facilities as well as our pools. Now, all that being said, that's based on who gets billed for the meter. And so we have some meters that serve in a particular park. They might also be serving a facility or a pool. So, but in general, that's how it breaks out. In the graph to the right is showing you the breakdown between recycled water and potable water. Now, we're including this information, but for the purposes of this plan, because the recycled water plant is down, we are considering all of our water as potable water. In developing this plan, we looked at the short and long-term impacts that drought can have. We looked at how we would be good stewards of public property and in particular protect our historic resources. We looked at how the public uses our different park areas and facilities. We looked to see whether we needed to make any programmatic changes to achieve a greater water savings. We are also concerned about the financial impacts, understanding that that's just a reality. It's something we have to look at. In some cases, there's a greater concern than others. And we also, at the initial stages, spent a lot of time looking at infrastructure improvements. We've been working very closely with the public works staff to identify additional easy just do it's as well as some rather expensive that would be good for us to do in the longer term because we live in a community that will face drought again even once this drought is over. So you are already very aware of this, but just to cover it, it is a city priority that all of our public facilities have the best technology and equipment in place for water conservation. And our parks and our golf course have central irrigation control systems, which basically is smart water meters, but on a much higher level. And we have drought-tolerant landscaping. For the scope of some of these different areas, I thought it was important to educate the public in terms of what the Parks and Recreation Department is responsible for. So as we look at parks, sports fields, and public landscaped areas, we are responsible for 47 developed and open space parks, nearly 1,800 acres of parkland, 5 ball field facilities, 32,000 street trees, park trees, and facility trees such as City Hall and the library, and landscaped areas around the recreation, sports, and other public facilities. Our primary considerations in these areas was turf, planter beds, and trees, and by far, no surprise, the biggest water user is turf. So we looked at our irrigation systems and developed our priorities based on safety considerations, for example, looking at ball fields and spaces that people use, recreational use, to some degree aesthetics, and revenue generation, because we do generate revenue back to the general fund from these facilities, and the maintenance service levels. And if you will recall, each of our park areas that we maintain is assigned a maintenance service level between a 1 and a 5. As examples, 1 being Alice Keck Park Memorial Garden, and 5 being Parma Park Open Space. So that came into play as well. So just pulling out some examples, the actual plan itself has much more detail, but we identified 3 levels of priority. 1 would be irrigating at our standard practice. So ball fields fall into that. Those are public spaces that people are using on a regular basis. Chase Pond Park expansion, so on the mountainside of Cabrillo, Chase Pond Park, the interior turf in that park is a variety that will not bounce back, and if we lose it, we lose it. And so we'll be irrigating there as well. It's a program site, for instance, where the summer concerts take place. And Morton Bay Fig Tree, that's another park that we will continue to irrigate as usual. Most of the parks, the greater number of parks are found in the following category, where we are reducing irrigation 20 to 30%. So some examples there, the Alameda Parks, East and West, Oak Park, Shoreline Park. And we have turned irrigation off in a number of parks as well. And the Bird Refuge, City Hall, Coast Village Rhode Islands, we turned that irrigation off as soon as we started hearing about Montecito's water problems, because those areas are currently covered by Montecito water and not city water. And just to show you, a picture sometimes says 1,000 words. So here, Cabrillo Ball Field and Dwight Murphy Ball Field. And I would say we are just watering to maintain a safe green appearance, so healthy fields. So if the weather is accommodating, we're reducing irrigation as we usually would. So a couple of examples where we're seeing more brown turf: Shoreline Park and Mission Historic Park by the A.C. Postel Memorial Rose Garden. I would say those pictures look pretty green compared to what I actually saw this last weekend taking a walk in both of those areas. And this you definitely see. We have park areas that are brown, and Mr. Escobar assures us that in most of those parks we have Bermuda grass, and it will come back with the first rains. So we will, be assured of that. We also looked at our planter beds. You know, Santa Barbara is known for our horticultural diverse horticulture throughout our city parks, and we don't want to lose those resources. So you'll see that we took the same approach: no change, reduced 20 to 30%, and irrigation off. So in the Rose Garden and at Alice Keck Park, we will be maintaining those planter beds, but we are reducing the irrigation to the planter beds in Shoreline Park and Chase Pond Park. To be compliant with the Stage 2 drought regulations, we have turned off our 2 decorative fountains, one in the Rose Garden and the other at Chase Pond Park Plaza by the Carousel. And this is a picture of the one by the Carousel, and you'll notice that we planted it. This is a very popular event venue. We had brides that were concerned about the empty fountain for their pictures, etc. And it is also a very beautiful spot for people. So we have planted it. When water comes back and we're able to use it, we'll be able to convert the fountain back without any harm to the plumbing or equipment. And also, we got a lot of inquiries right at the beginning of this about our ponds in Alice Keck Park as well as Chase Pond Park. There are no changes to how we maintain those ponds at this point in terms of water. Our trees in our community are beginning to really show the signs of drought. And the Parks Division is responsible for over 32,000 trees. We have almost 24,000 street trees, just a little over 9,000 park and public property trees. And when we look at what we expect to see from drought effects, in the short term, leaf wilting, leaf scorch, and defoliation. In the longer term, stunted growth, branch dieback, and possible death. And these can appear up to 3 years following a drought and we are seeing that as you drive around town and in all of our neighborhoods, we are seeing drought-stressed trees. And some trees will show those signs later, but some are already showing signs. And we also are seeing more dead trees around the community. And a couple of pictures here of a Brazilian pepper on each side of the street, one showing a little bit more drought stress than the other. And these are Canary Island pines. Did I get that right, Santos? Canary Island pines, and you can see we've lost one, and the others are showing a high degree of stress. So we are monitoring all of our trees. Our goal is to prevent loss and to minimize the short and long-term impacts. Generally, when we plant trees, we water them for the first 3 years. And once they are established, we don't. And the trees will survive on the water that comes naturally or that they draw from surrounding irrigated areas. So we will, one, be postponing any new planting of trees during this time of drought, so we're not adding to the tree inventory. We are looking at our irrigation and pruning and mulching to the degree that we can to help the trees, beginning to do outreach to neighbors and neighborhoods about how they can help to protect our trees, and increasing our level of monitoring tree health throughout the community of city trees. Our irrigation priority, we identified over 600 trees that we are very concerned about. Those include over 500 newly planted trees, 72 historic or specimen trees, 52 rare species, and trees that are in historically significant parks, so the Alamedas and Franceschi Park and some of those parks where we know those are resources that we need to be more protective of. And staff are currently developing a much more specific plan for how we'll continue to increase our care and attention to those specific trees as we go forward. The Recreation Division oversees 12 recreation, community center, and rental facilities, 2 lawn bowls facilities, 4 community gardens, 4 swimming pools, 5 shower facilities, and 2 tennis facilities. All of those facilities, we have spent time looking for additional water conservation opportunities and working with water resources to get them installed. Pools and shower facilities are our largest water users, so that's where we focused. And we will, throughout all of our facilities, be focusing on public education and outreach to all of our facility users about the role they play in conserving water in our facilities. Swimming pools, very specifically, one of the things that we investigated was putting in a new automatic backwash device at Los Baños Pool. And by doing that, we will save a significant amount of water on an annual basis. So we investigated the cost and we said, let's just find the money. So we are getting that installed. Ortega Park Pool has a seasonal operation, and we are open as usual. And we have purchased a pool cover. We're waiting for it to be delivered. Oak Park Pool, again, a seasonal operation. That pool, however, is drained when it's not in use. So out of season, it's drained. And because of that, we requested and received an exemption for a pool cover from the Public Works Director. And West Beach Wading Pool, in doing the analysis on that, that pool has a pretty significant leak. And we were having to add water to that pool every day of operation. Additionally, because of the location and the birds, the black night herons that live in the trees adjacent to that facility, we were having to power wash all of the deck areas and the sidewalks around it on a daily basis to meet health code requirements. So because of that, we decided we would not open West Beach Wading Pool this year. So we are operating Oak Park Wading Pool as we would usually. Pool maintenance. We have purchased 4 battery-operated blowers, and we use those to clean the decks and the outdoor surfaces. That is instead of using a hose and power washing the decks. And we will spot clean as needed to meet health and safety regulations. Shower facilities is probably where our users see the biggest difference, and we'll see as they all roll out with the new shower heads what kinds of comments we get from our facility users. We already had low-flow shower heads, but we are going to an extremely low-flow shower head that cuts the water flow by half again. So, and we have bilingual signage in all of our shower facilities, limiting showers to 5 minutes. At Cabrillo Bathhouse in particular, we have turned the water off to a number of our shower heads, so we've reduced the number of available showers. And we've installed at Los Baños water cutoff valves that allow the staff to turn off the showers. We're recreation. We get a lot of kids in our facilities, and so kids jump in the shower and then they run and go jump. They don't run. They walk and jump in the pool. But they leave the water running oftentimes, so this allows staff to go in and just turn off the showers. And we have 1 set of outdoor beach showers at East Beach, so we have turned off the upper showers and we are leaving the foot showers activated. At Municipal Tennis Facility and Carrillo Gym, we have shower facilities that are not used very regularly at all. We checked in with the facility users of Municipal Tennis and they were fine. We are closing those showers. At Carrillo Gym, we're going to leave those open, but we'll be monitoring that use very carefully. If we see that use go up, then we will close those showers. So just some quick pictures. The picture on the left is at Cabrillo Bathhouse. The other thing that we did was we installed a handle, a pull-down handle, which activates the shower. It's a continuous hold handle. And so we have people in that facility in particular that tend to just be in the shower for a long time. This really helps with us asking people to keep to 5 minutes. And then you have a picture of the Los Baños showers as well. So in some of the other recreation facilities, rental facilities and neighborhood centers, as I said, we're really focusing on water conservation. The biggest water uses primarily restrooms, drinking fountains, some kitchen. And we also are using the battery-powered blowers instead of washing the outdoor surfaces. Same thing on the tennis courts. We traditionally use a water broom, which is very water saving in itself, but we're replacing that with a battery-powered blower and only occasional water broom when needed. And we are working with all of the people who have gardens in our 4 community garden locations so they understand what the drought regulations are and educating them about conserving their water use in the garden. And now we get to the golf course, which is probably the biggest part of the focus for us in many ways. Golf course water, 88% of the water used at the golf course is recycled, and 10% is potable used on the course. 2% is potable used in the restaurant, drinking fountains, and restrooms. 10% of the potable water is used on the golf greens, which is that well-manicured small area around each hole. So that does not include the fairways and all of the other areas around the golf course. And those are a very delicate turf. They're cut very short. They're very prone to disease. Because it's short, you have to water more often, and also you have to wash out the accumulation of salts from the greens. And it's important to note that normally the golf course would be reliant on recycled water. But in this instance, we are all using potable water. But it's important to understand that if it were recycled, we would be a different story. So the golf course has worked to reduce or eliminate their irrigation cycles. And as mentioned before, we do have the central irrigation system. We've been hand watering because it's more targeted and more effective than running some of the irrigation sprinklers. We've increased our aerification so that the water that we're putting on the course is going deeper into the turf areas and more effective. To clean our turf machinery, we've actually been doing it around the course, so to an area that needs to be watered, and then we're cleaning the equipment on that portion of the turf and moving around to the different areas. The golf carts, instead of being washed on a daily basis, which they were previously, are being cleaned with cloths and pressurized air, and they are only using water when needed. And we have been working with Water Resources, as I mentioned, to look at other infrastructure efficiencies, both short and long term, that we could make at the golf course for the future. We also identified priorities here, and some of the pictures are very striking. You can see the difference. Our first priority are the greens. We have 20, I thought there were 20, but I heard the number 22. 22 greens on the course that have that higher level of maintenance. And then down towards the end of the list, of course, are the rough, the non-playable areas, areas that the golfers are less likely to play on and that are not as important to how their game goes. It's more about aesthetics and what people are used to seeing. So here you can see a couple of differences. The picture that is on the left is the number 2 green. This was taken at the end of May. Looking in the same direction, but at the middle of July, you can see that the green is significantly green and the surrounding areas are brown. Same thing on the number 10 green left picture from the end of May, and the right picture taken just last week. And hole number 18, after the last rain, which was in March, that can't be the right number, and then hole number 18 taken the middle of July. It just shows you the difference. So the golf course has some unique challenges right now. Council is aware of the challenges that we've had at the golf course, so I won't go into a great deal of detail except to say we are feeling very pressed right now to protect the city's only municipal golf course. It is an enterprise fund. It exists off of golf revenues only, no tax support. We have a very competitive local golf market, and the golf course is still recovering from construction and the recession that, since 2009, 2010. We are still not back to pre-2009 levels of play at the golf course. So in the last drought, records show that they lost about 25% play, and it took a number of years for that to resume. We're in a very different situation right now with golf, and we just as we have seen, it's been very difficult for us to grow back to where we were before the construction and the recession. I'm not sure if we lose that 25% that we would be able to get back to that level. We will strive to do that. But I think it's important to realize this is not a situation where we expect that we'll be able to grow back to where we are. So we are concerned, on top of our other challenges that we already have financially. We are at below policy reserves. Our revenue was down for prior to May, we exceeded last year's performance for the previous 9 months. So we were very pleased with how the golf course was doing. But we hit May and we were down. And between May and June, we were $40,000 below our projected revenue. And in the first 2 weeks of July, we're already down 15% in play. So we are seeing the impacts. Part of this is, we have the challenge. Our biggest local competitor is really Glen Annie. Goleta is not having apparently the same water challenges that we're having, and at any rate, their golf course looks strikingly different from ours. All that being said, it's just a factor that comes into play for the golf course financially. It's still all about water, and we understand that, but it's important that we understand what the situation is with the golf course financially. We also have some increased costs related to the drought, both the cost of water, which is increasing significantly, and our additional labor costs related to hand watering and our infrastructure improvements. Pulling back to what are we doing department-wide, we
have a question, Mr. Francisco. Go ahead.
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Ms. Rapp, so is Muni the only government-owned golf course in the area?
Madam Mayor and Council Member Francisco, yes, we are the only municipal golf course in Santa Barbara. Beyond us would be Ventura.
Okay. So we don't pay property tax then, correct?
That would be correct.
And so all the other golf courses in the area are paying property tax?
I would assume so.
So that's a significant competitive advantage for us, right?
It is, although, and I don't know what Glen Annie's tax base is. It might still be agricultural. I don't know.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
I'm not sure that is La Cumbra a for-profit club, or is it it may not be that one. I mean, Montecito clearly is. And also maybe Valley would be the other one to look at as far as getting some special deals there.
So department-wide, we are focusing on bilingual signage, educating the public. We are looking at our landscape installations, so any new projects, projects that the Parks Department would routinely do, we are pulling back from any new installations. We will look at projects and, as we can, phase them in, so plants going into the ground are going in after the drought is resolved. And of course, we always try to plant natives and drought-tolerant plants. But it's more about new plants need water to be established. So there will be some instances where we do new plantings, but they will be very closely reviewed. And throughout the department, we look at vehicle washing. We're washing less frequently. We already use facilities with recycled water and water collection systems. We do have a few exceptions, like the lifeguard truck, which is on the beach every day and has to be washed to preserve the life of the vehicle. So the plan is intended to be a working plan. When we started this effort, I went through all of the department files and could not find any materials on how the Parks Department or the Recreation Department responded to the last significant drought that this community went through in the late 1980s, early 1990s. This plan will live in department files, and it will be a tool. We will continue to modify it as conditions change, and we will be giving regular updates to the Park and Recreation Commission as we go forward. And we are very concerned at this point because we are now pretty dry out there, and we are asking ourselves whether in all of these cases we're being good stewards of public resources, and that will be a continuing challenge and a continuing debate. But we are having that internally when we look at how pulling back on water affects community use of our parks. We're not worried about aesthetics. It's about how the community uses our parks. Again, financial concerns that we've talked about. We are, just to share, we are seeing some impacts on rentals of our parks and our facilities. Not unexpected. When people made their reservation for the wedding, it was a year ago, parks were beautiful, and they show up now and they're brown, and so it's understandable. And oftentimes people are not from Santa Barbara, so in their community they're not seeing the same level of response to drought. But we are seeing that, and so we are having some revenue loss. We'll see where it goes. And we have developed a very substantial system to track how we're using water, and we are holding staff accountable at the program, division, and department level. So trust me, we know our water. We know where it is and how much we're using. So we have become very knowledgeable about our water. And I wanted to just quickly show you some of our progress, February through May. Stage 2 drought was announced in February, so we've included since February. And we are going through May because we still don't have all of the numbers for June. With 107 water meters and water bills, they trickle in at different times over the month. We have some preliminary numbers that, as we go through this, they're tracking about the same as what you see there. But for the department overall, we are down 34% as compared to last year. Now, last year was also a hot, dry year. So while it's 34%, that probably water use last year was higher than previous years where we had more rain. Parks, 34%. golf, 34%, and recreation division, 27%, and it's actually pretty good since they're just really dealing with facilities. But overall for the department, 34%. So with that, I'm happy with my staff to answer any specific questions you have, and we'll go from there.
Do you have any speaker slips on this? We do. If I could bring that up at this point. Great. Phil Walker, why don't you come on up?
Excuse me. Ms. Rapp's presentation report was very well taken, very comprehensive and good. Just a few pointers. Last week, I caught it late at night. A noted meteorologist said, watch out. You know, people have talked about El Nino and pulling us out of this dilemma, but he doesn't see it. The polar vortex and the blocking high, the Omega block on the west coast are setting up even stronger this year. So he sees more ongoing drought. The last couple days, the chairwoman of the State Water Resources Control Board said, we do not know when it will rain again. Things are getting extremely serious. Okay, what I see, Alameda and Oak Park, they, in essence, serve as a lot of front yards and backyards for a lot of people in the multifamily housing. And, you know, there's good chunks of Oak Park reverting to the Mission Creek alluvium or silt. And, you know, these things will happen, but you see the street, the trees getting stressed too. And maybe a couple of deep irrigations till fall will help out. But both those parks are very, very invaluable resources, and it's good to see a lot of attention just trying to keep them going. So, you know, we're in a dilemma, that's for sure, and thank you very much.
And the final speaker on this item is Ethan.
I'm not clear how this process goes in comment of whether I address staff or just only to. Okay, so I appreciate the aesthetic appeal on the water fountain. Didn't realize that this was going to actually be on the agenda, and so I just have to wonder, though, how much water. I realize that it's drought-resistant plantage in there, but it still requires water, and when water is being put into the fountain, isn't that recycling itself with just a little bit added into as a result of evaporation? So I guess in terms of my perspective as the public as to how much water is being used for that space on that fountain, how the engineering goes around that. Also, in regards to the low flow showers, my experience has been is that the lower flow, the shower, the longer it takes to be able to rinse your hair. And some studies have suggested that less water has been saved as a result of lack of pressure for the duration in order to be able to get clean from all the chlorine and all of that you get from the pool. Those are my insights.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, it's to the council. Mr. Hart.
Well, first I just want to say this is a really extraordinarily comprehensive report. An excellent job. Councilmember White and I had the opportunity to hear this presentation yesterday at the Water Commission, and so I just want to commend you. This is the kind of very specific, fine-grained detail that's critical to making these decisions. And these decisions are not easy because there are trade-offs, and we don't know what's going to happen with the weather, as Mr. Walker said. You can ask lots of different people and you'll get lots of different ideas about what's going to happen in the fall with rain. But the bottom line is, I think, from our perspective, it's only responsible to plan on the worst case scenario and then adjust if we're lucky. If we're lucky and it does rain, Mr. Escobar, can you tell me more about how things recover? What would happen, even if we didn't get lots of rain, if we just got as much rain as we got last year, how much of the turf will temporarily recover, without additional water?
Mayor Snyder, Councilmember Hart, in regards to your question here, if we do get our average rainfall, which is between 17 and 18 inches of rain per year, then things should recover quite nicely with their drought conditions. If we don't, then it could be very severe.
What if we got how much we got last year? Is that going to make a significant difference? Is there a point of diminishing returns where you just don't catch up and the plants aren't able to revive themselves?
If we don't get, if we get between 4 to 6 inches of rainfall like we have received, then things won't catch up.
Okay.
We'll still be in the same dilemma we're in today.
So it'll go brown as because the difference between last year we were watering, now we've reduced, and so we're seeing the effects of that. And so if we get the same kind of rain that we're going to have next year, it's not going to come back like those pictures of the golf course, the pictures of all the other parks. It's going to stay brown through as much rain as we would got last year.
Correct. We will see. We'll see stressing, and where we will receive this rainfall, it will be somewhat green. Naturally, the Bermuda and Kikuyu will recover. Mm-hmm. We could go through and see this for a couple of years and still be okay. If not, then once again it will be severe, and we will have to go through in major areas and reseed many parks and many golf courses. So that's where we're at.
Because the real question is the irony of the reclaimed water plant being down this year. That's the problem. If that weren't the case, we'd have that water and we'd need to use that water, or otherwise we're not going to. Maybe it's just going to go out in the ocean and not be used. So the question then is, do we do anything extraordinary this year, knowing that next year we're going to have the reclaimed water online? And I guess that's an interesting discussion, and I don't know what the answer to that is. I think we're on track, in terms of community relations and speaking to the community about how important this is and how serious this drought is. Yeah, I think it's appropriate for the course that you're taking. And we'll just have to hope that the plant comes online and this becomes less of an issue. But it's going to be an interesting issue on a philosophical point when we do have that resource and we have this conflict between the ability to have green lawn and neighbors in residential neighborhoods not having the ability to have green lawn. And that's an interesting symbolic choice for the council to have to make. And, I understand the difference. It is lots of folks' front and backyard where they don't have that option. So I get that. This is, no decision needs to be made today about all these things, but these are some of the trade-offs. Just so I have a sense of perspective, when you mention, rental impacts from facilities, can you give me a percentage number? Is that 1%? Is that 10%? Is that what does that mean in terms of revenue for the department? And maybe even while you're explaining that too, the additional time and staff effort to do the hand watering. What is the kind of delta we're looking at here between business as usual and this extra effort to hand water, and coupled with the declining revenues for facilities? So get a sense, next year what the deficits you're going to be looking at financially is.
Madam Mayor and Councilmember Hart, I'll break your question down into two separate discussions. The first is recreation, which handles all of the reservations in our parks. And we are just starting to have a few people ask for refunds. What we won't know is how many people never even approached us but decided not to hold their event in that location. So mostly what we're hearing now is word of mouth. So we should have a sense of that, whether we have a financial impact or not within the next, certainly by early fall. But we're hearing about it now. In terms of the golf course, I'm sure that we could come up with the impact of, we already are, if we were down 40,000 in May and June, and that trend is continuing and probably will, get worse, then we're going to be doing actually some projections of where we are. Our hand watering to compensate is we have increased our hourly staff because we have a limited number of full-time staff out at the golf course, so we are using more hourly staff. They're in our budget currently. It's just that's become the focus. But I think the bigger issue for the golf course is the combination of all of our expenses, which the golf course runs a pretty lean operation already, and looking at what are we projecting for revenue impact from the decline in play. And we will be spending some effort in the next couple weeks to really pull that together now that we're continuing to see that trend, and it seems to be pretty stable at this point.
The other extra cost I think that you mentioned was that the watering of street trees that you wouldn't normally be watering to. How big a number is that in the context of your budget? Is that a extra full-time employee? Is that a $100,000 number?
Actually, I know that Jill Zachary has been spending a bit of time working out with staff how we're going to manage our urban forests during this drought. So if I could have Jill respond to that.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Hart, we have one full-time staff member who's responsible for watering trees. We are monitoring how much water, we're actually measuring how much water is allocated to each tree and prioritizing his route based on the sensitive trees that we have. Right now, we haven't determined that we need additional resources to do that. We're just, however, at the beginning of getting a handle on how much we think we're achieving with the current resources that we have.
Okay. Well, I guess what I'm thinking is that, these major investments, street trees, the golf course fundamentally needs special attention. I think what we're telling the public is nobody has to turn off all their water use outdoors. We're asking people to get a 20% reduction, and that works into our plan. If we have 20% reduction citywide this year and we do it continuously, we have a plan to get through this. And so I'm a little worried that, and you're doing such a great job, you're doing more than that. And so I want to understand where the trade-off is in terms of, are we going to lose street trees because we're saving 34% of the water when we're asking to save 20%? And I want to understand that carefully because I don't know that I want to make that choice. And so I'd like to know, if you need another person to do that, to make sure that we don't lose as many street trees as we might. I want to understand that trade-off. I don't know where I'd come down on that, and I don't know where I'd come down in terms of the golf course, but I think having that information, as fast as you can, I'd like the fact that your plan is strategic and adaptable, and you're going to adjust as this goes on. This is the first cut, but I think that's important for us to understand those trade-offs.
Mr. White.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I appreciate both your work, and I think it was useful for me to hear it twice in 2 days. I'm a little more able to work with it than if I had just heard it once. It was obviously a head full to grab a hold of, and I really appreciate Mr. Hart coming yesterday and also your comments. I thought were a good opening salvo on this topic because there's a lot of philosophical bits in here to turn around. This is our communal space. Do we take better care of our communal space than we do our own place? So because everybody gets to share, the elements like that start coming into the picture. Another piece that I wanted to ask, and I'm glad we have water folks here, maybe they can translate this or can remember from the documents that we saw yesterday. How many acre feet we had? Your staff is park staff using HCF. Now, can we translate that back into how many acre feet are we talking about that the park plan is talking about today, so that we can get to apples and apples with our total water budget?
All right, Madam Mayor, Councilmember White, 1 acre foot is about 43,000. CF.
Yeah, okay.
So basically we'll be looking at 4,000, is that right? 4,000 HCF.
How many acre feet is the park's budget. Total. Was it 150,000 HCF? Was that the number that was?
In 2013, we used roughly 155,000 HCF.
Acre feet?
Right.
How many acre feet? Okay. How many acre feet? Yeah. I mean, that's how I can go and compare to what our city budget is.
You know what I thought was helpful in that regard was if the reclaimed water system was online, parks would be using 1% of the city's water supply. With it not online, they're using 3.5%. Okay. So that number helps me in context.
I hadn't recalled those numbers.
Yeah.
But that's the kind of thing that I'm looking for out of this. That we're talking about then a maximum of 3% of our city's water budget. And I thought that you really brought up the right topics of the philosophical discussion, and also in the Water Commission meeting yesterday, some very impassioned water commissioners who are guarding their water, or our water, and who are guarding the rates, just trying to make sure things are fair, because the reclaimed water is definitely a subsidized system. Some of our more expensive water from the standpoint of production, and yet it's some of the cheapest water that we sell. So there's a lot of pieces in here to work with, and as Mr. Hart was saying, to have a discussion so that it's a community. Okay, folks, this is the balancing act that we're coming up with, and that this council is buying into. And I'm looking forward to hearing what our colleagues have to say about this, because I can tell you that my gravitation was towards saying, also, this is one-time, we talked about in our budget, one-time money. Okay, one-time water. We've got a one-time year here, presuming that, in fact, this reclaim system is going to be up and running next summer. So what kind of bridge do we create this year, particularly for parks? Because as I understand it, most of the reclaimed water is used for public benefit. There's one big profit-making facility that goes for reclaim, and that's the Montecito Country Club. But I believe that yes, there are relatively small users along the way that are for profit, but basically, it's the schools and the parks that use, and the golf course being a park too, that use reclaimed water. So the bridge, how big a bridge do we create for parks going forward? And whereas yesterday you could hear the water commissioners going, we just got to hold on to every acre foot of potable water. This is a real waste this year. And of course, people have heard me howling about not meeting our conservation goals with our rate structure and such. So now you're hearing a little different side of me of saying, I'm a little more committed to providing a bridge for these community resources, for the trees, even for the golf course, such that that as a community resource, as a public benefit, this is very different than the private single-family dwelling, which is where most of the landscape water is being used. And it's very individual there that folks use a goodly amount of water. So, as I say, I thought that Mr. Hart was on pitch as far as how I'm looking at it, too. If this is a community discussion item, and I'm not, all the way there on what exactly to do. I thought that staff brought us, an excellent menu and strategy package. So, as I say, and my heart is one of more going in the direction of saying, let's commit some one-time money, some one-time water to this to get us to the reclaimed system. And then, because at least folks who are using the golf course there's a lot of folks using the golf course, and there are a lot of folks using the parks. So I want to hear more because it's a big topic, but that's at least I think we've got a lot of good information on the table for us to work with, and I'd be really interested to hear what my colleagues have to say about this too.
So, if I understand correctly, the recycled water facility should be up by next summer. And the idea is, assuming that happens, then we could go back to regular irrigation in areas that use recycled water, including the golf course, correct?
Madam Mayor, that would be correct, and I believe that Councilmember Hart said it best. The recycled water will be there, and if it's not used, then
It goes to the
just
ocean.
goes to
Right.
the ocean, and so using it would put us back where we status quo.
Thank you. So just to follow up from the comments before, I guess my perspective is there's a difference between aesthetics and keeping trees, or, there's obviously, as you are looking at. And there's also a symbolic role, I think, we play here in the city about, don't ask others to do things that we won't do ourselves. And especially in areas that, now, if the recycled water purple pipes were in full compliance and use, it'd be a different scenario, but it's not. So we're using potable water. So I think areas that can stay brown, as long as we don't kill it forever, certain areas, is okay and actually sends a good message. Some comments about fountains as well. We made a distinction in the stage 2 drought restrictions to allow for residential fountains or fountains that had fish or turtles or whatever, but others like the dolphin fountain and the ones you mentioned, we turned off. And I think that's an important symbolic measure to make people see around town, and it makes a difference. I was just at the county courthouse before today, and the Spirit of the Ocean fountain, that's the county facility, but that's not running either. And people notice that, and it's a constant reminder that we are in a drought. So I think that messaging is important. I do have a question, given that the Purple Pipes, the recycled water facility, is not, we're using potable water. I was driving on Cabrillo Boulevard towards State Street from Milpas. I look to the left, and the ocean and Chase Palm Park is very brown. I look to the right near the Fess Parker, and that is very green. And if my memory serves me correctly, that front part of Fess Parker is park. It's not Fess Parker's property. Now, am I correct in that we ask them to maintain that area? And if so, should we not be asking them, at least for the public park area, to reduce the landscaping? I know they won't like hearing that, but it's still potable water that we're using. If it was recycled water, I'd have a whole different perspective. But if the contrast on one side of Cabrillo Boulevard to the other is quite dramatic, and it sends the wrong message, frankly. I don't know the answers to that, if you can expand on that.
Madam Mayor and Council, yes, it is public property. I forget the number of feet going in from the curb line that is actually public property. And yes, I'm sure between Water Resources and Parks and Recreation, we could communicate a message. I'm sure, part of it will just be their irrigation system and how it's set up, but I think more important is the ask.
Yeah, and, and we're really looking at this summer, because by this time next year, the recycled water facility should be up and running. We'll use that water so those grass areas can come back, and we're not reducing the level of potable water, and dealing with the drought situation. So that may be something, and I, just sort of add to this conversation piece. But I guess when it comes also to the golf course, we'll have to monitor the usage of it. And again, it kind of feels like the recession of this too shall pass, and how much one-time hits can the golf course take. At the same time, especially since we're using potable water and the message that it gives, I think the strategy you're using so far makes a lot of sense. If we were, and we also put in a lot of capital improvements for water retention and drainage. There was the project from a few years ago, and we don't want to lose the benefit of the money that we spent in that capital project. So I guess the issue for me right now is really to monitor how things are going, and perhaps at the end of the calendar year, as we know more with the weather patterns, we can look at this once more. But in terms of that area and the park areas that use purple pipes, that's going to, I think, change dramatically next year between this year and next year, and hopefully there'll be rain in the winter, but we just don't know yet. So, Mr. Hart.
One thing that wasn't part of this presentation I think was helpful that I heard at the Water Commission yesterday is that the most recent information is that community-wide we have a 15% reduction in use in this last month. So I think people are getting it. They're seeing the brown lawns. They're seeing what the city's doing. They're responding. And it's not quite where we want them to be, but that's probably mostly before folks got their bills for the increased prices. So I think we're going to see the 20% reduction, even more than a 20% reduction with the next reporting period. That's not going to catch us up to the full year of a 20% reduction, but it's going to go, we could be surprised, pleasantly surprised by how the community's stepping up. And I think your point about the symbolism of these public facilities is important. And what's interesting about that and complex is that there's a lot of other public facilities that are making other decisions about their water use that are not necessarily consistent with the decisions that we're making. And this is a regional drought, and as Ms. Rapp pointed out, the facilities in Goleta, they're in a different situation with their water, may or may not be, but they're choosing tactically to have a different approach. And so that complexity from a public consumer who doesn't necessarily understand the difference between the city's facilities and the county's facilities and the school's facilities and the community college's facilities and all the other public facilities makes it really challenging, I think, for us to message this.
I agree. I would agree with that. Trying to get a regional consistent message is one thing. At the same time, we only have control over what we water and what we don't, and so we might as well do what we can with what we think is the best way to go. But I appreciate that philosophy there. Ms. Murillo?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I support your suggestion to talk to the Doubletree Hotel, and thank you for the report. I know this is all really difficult. I like cutting off the shower. So somebody's in there too long, you just turn off the knob on them. I like it. And please, I at this point support water going to our horticultural resources and those trees. Councilmember White, I wasn't sure the question that you were throwing at us, but you kept saying I want to hear from my colleagues. I think at this point we can share with the Parks Department, but things are getting so desperate, and I just bite my nails sometimes thinking about it. I hope to do more than just bite my nails, but it's going to be some tough decision making if it doesn't rain. But at this point, I support the plan as it is. Thank you.
Any other comments? Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. We don't need a motion on this. This was just to receive a report and provide comment. So we will move on to item number 22.
Bicycle Master Plan Update Community Engagement Process.
Okay. Mr. Dayton, whenever you're ready.
Madam Mayor and council members, my name is Rob Dayton with the Public Works Department. We're here to talk to you about the pending Bicycle Master Plan update. And specifically, we want to talk to you about the community engagement process and how we would do that. Normally, we would be here with a request for proposal, a contract with a consultant to do the work. But this is an extra step because we noticed there's a difference in the process between the last master plan, which is in 1998, and this one. And we want to outline those differences. The main difference is that in 1998, we really reached out to the bicycle community. And this plan, we really need to do an effective job. We're proposing to reach out to the whole Santa Barbara community in terms of the bicycle master plan. These are the Bicycle Master Plan objectives that we came up with, and I don't want to spend a lot of time. I'm going to come back to the objectives, but first tell a story as to how we arrived on the objectives and what the challenge is for our community engagement process. So for this presentation, I want to first talk about the 1998 plan that we did, and then what's happened. What happened? Was it good? Did you finish anything? And then we'll talk about the future of bicycling, and then finally the importance of this community engagement process, and specifically what we're proposing to do that. The 1998 Bicycle Master Plan was a very simple three-part strategy: provide a bikeable roadway network, a place to hitch, which is a place to park your bike, and an invitation to ride your bike. Those were the three approaches. And the accomplishments that we've made in those three approaches are fairly big. We went from 13 miles of bike lanes to 40 miles of bike lanes. We've installed publicly and privately over 2,000 parking spaces for bikes. And then we have an extensive bike programming that has grown over the years and is mainly through our partners, Traffic Solutions and Santa Barbara Bicycle Coalition. Many of those leaders are in the room. So how did we expand the bicycle network so dramatically from 13 to 40 miles? Well, the first thing we did was the simple thing, and that is every time you're redoing a road and you're going to cover that road with new asphalt, you say, is the room there for bike lanes? Very, very simple. And I would say somewhere between 70 and 80% of the length that we achieved was just in that step. Didn't cost us hardly anything extra. The cost of those two extra paint stripes. And then the second way we did it was in rearranging. This is De La Vina, and actually this step, going from 4 to 3 lanes, wasn't even a bike lane project. This was a safety project because we were having rear-end collisions for left turners. But the benefit on De La Vina is bike lanes. And then also on Carrillo, a similar thing, where we didn't need 4 lanes going to the high school over on Olive Street. We went to 3 lanes of traffic and 2 bike lanes. Another way to do it is you reduce the number of lanes and put in a bike lane. That was done in the 1974 plan for Bath and Castillo, and then more recently on this on Chapala, which was in the upper area where the residents were complaining about speeds in the 2 lanes, the 2 lanes of traffic they were complaining about speeds, and so we suggested going to 1 lane, which the council implemented, and to do that leftover lane, we got a bike lane. In more dramatic fashion and a little bit more controversial was the Shoreline project, and this was the 1958 Caltrans facility going up to the Mesa and Shoreline Drive, and just too much roadway capacity and on the ocean front, and you can see the difference between before and after taking those 2 lanes that are on the ocean side and converting them into bike path, park, and an extra sidewalk, and tremendously used, I might add. Then innovative ways where we don't have the room for bike lanes, but put what we call sharrows, an indication to message to motorists and bikes that there's a shared experience here, and expect bikes, and then bikes, it's okay to ride here. We have route and signage all over the region in a cooperation with Goleta and Carpinteria. And then a place to park your bike. We do about 50 of these a year. This is the hitching post. In the public right-of-way, the advantage of bicycling is that you can usually park right in front of the door where you want to go, and having a hitch post there provides that opportunity. Also, the bike station. We're putting in another bike station at the MTD transit station this summer. And then Bike to Work Day, which grew into Bike to Work Week, which is now Bike Month, Cycle Mania, and just a clean way of fun that Traffic Solutions does, to a little competitive, and gets people introduced to the fact that, wow, they could probably ride a bike too. So what is all this? Where's all this gotten us to? Well, according to the U.S. Census data, we've grown since 2000 to 2012 101% in bicycling. These statistics are all for journey to work. Bicycling is nearly 7% of the work trip. And then we've also, during that time, had a corresponding 10% reduction in driving. So not all of that reduction in driving is an advance of bicycling. Also, we've increased in walking and transit. But I think the thing that's noteworthy here is that as we move forward with with traffic growth and we want to keep congestion at bay, this can be an effective strategy. We are now 8th in the nation for bicycling to work for all cities and 3rd in the nation for cities our size, 65 to 100,000 population. Another metric of where we are is from the League of American Bicyclists. They have rated our community as a silver level bicycle-friendly community. You have their scorecard in the council report. This is it as well. And you see the 101% increase as compared to 61% in the nationwide growth of bikes. And then it shows you in the scorecard exactly what they're looking at, which is a mix of ridership and safety, public opinion, and then what are our actions, our activities, and the 5 E's: engineering, education, encouragement, enforcement, and evaluation, in moving forward with bicycle facilities. They outline, you can't read them up here, but they outline some key steps to getting to gold. How do you get to gold? And so this is their opinion, is that we need to update the Bicycle Master Plan. Surprise, that's what we're doing. And then also they're talking about encouraging us to do not just bike lanes, but things called buffered bike lanes and cycle tracks and bike boulevards. And we really have been hearing a lot about this. Why? Well, because our citizenry goes to another city and they see it somewhere else. And not every one of the communities where they're seeing these things do they have as much cycling as we do in Santa Barbara. But we have found in these cities that they're growing in bicycle numbers faster. So here are some examples. We have in San Francisco, this one's on Market Street. Not only the delineated kind of buffered area here, but kind of a green carpet, which is now the standard color for if you do paint the bike lane a different color. Here is Long Beach, where they've placed the parking on the other side, where the parking used to be, where this new one-direction path is. This is called a cycle track. And then you can see in the background they have green marking only the conflict points with motorists. Santa Cruz actually has a bidirection cycle track. San Luis Obispo, this is a green lane that's at the conflict point where you'd expect motorists to cross the bike lanes. And the feedback from the green lanes has been that the motorists like them too, because they feel like, okay, well, that's where the bike's supposed to be, and there's a little bit more distinction on the road. That being said, these type of facilities, let's call them the modern day bicycle facilities that are being done in these other cities, we've been asked to look at. These require a little bit heavier lifting than we've done. Like I said, we've done the easy stuff, the repaving, restriping. We've done that. We've kind of taken the places where there's extra auto capacity and switched those over. So going to this next level, it's going to have to be more intentional. It's going to have to say, okay, well, let's look at all transportation. How is this affecting driving? How is this affecting parking? Those type of things. So that's why we think that this next level, this master plan, needs a higher degree of public engagement, not just people who are bicycling, but all people who consider this issue. So this is the community engagement process that we're proposing. We don't pretend to know that we're in transportation, that we're the best at community engagement, so we actually hired someone to tell us what would be the best way to engage the community, and this is the recommendation that firm gave. And I'm going to go through each one of these. First of all, an online survey that would be available mainly to internet, smartphone users, framing the issue with the Santa Barbara bicycle dilemma, kind of the presentation intro I just gave you, that yes, there's possibility, here's the compromises, and then getting it at 20 or 25 questions about getting people's feedback. The goal would be 300 to 500 responses. And then a stakeholder roadshow. That would be, as you know, we have many associations at various different places in business and residences, going to those associations and telling them about and showing the video, the Santa Barbara Bicycle Dilemma that we would produce, and then promoting participation, gaining insights from those groups, and then videotaping those experiences so that we can tell the story later. One-on-one interviews. There would be a team of people, 250 one-on-one interviews, which is a lot. done in the context of the users. So this would be certainly bicycle users, but also people who are driving, Santa Barbarans walking, business owners, residents who actually live on bike lanes, to get a feel of how they feel about the future of bicycling, and then videotaping to tell a story later. And then what we would do is we'd take those first three aspects, the surveys, the road shows, and the interviews, and start to formulate, okay, here's what it seems like the pulse of Santa Barbara is in this area. And come to, and then the next step, take some proposals that would be neighborhood specific. So now we're talking about actual changes on the road, according to the vibe we're feeling, and going to the downtown, the east side, the west side, the Mesa, uptown, with the goal of engaging those neighborhoods to find out, have them react to those, give their feedback, and come up with some 2 to 3 key initiatives for that region about what their feeling is for bikes. Then we would draft the master plan, have a staff report that would document everything we've done, and then a mini documentary. This would be to all the interviews, the road show, the neighborhood summits, all the video clips from all those, and so you could really get a feel for what the community is saying and see it, not just read about it, with a draft implementation option. So give the council some options. Here's a hot, medium, cold of what we feel like the vibe of the community is saying. And then boards and commissions. We think that it's important to have multiple check-ins with boards and commissions to keep them engaged in this process, keep them in the know, keep them coming to the meetings we're doing. So there's lots of communications. We think that the Planning Commission, the Transportation Committee, and the Downtown Parking Committee are good. Those are who we're recommending as our key advisors, and of course the council. So timeline. This is what this process looks like in time. It is a long process, and we're hoping to come, if we got approval today, we'd come back with a contract and a consultant, hopefully in August, September, probably more like September, and then back to the boards and commissions with process prep before we launch, do the road show, the surveys and the interviews, develop alternatives, and then back to the boards and commissions with what we believe we're going to be telling the neighborhoods to check in with them. Are we getting it right? And then going to do those neighborhood summits, taking that information and developing the final draft plan and the mini documentary, boards and commissions, and back to council. We need to have this approved. We have some financial deadlines, and that's January 16. And then the other aspect about it is the implementation phase. One thing that we really have learned in transportation over a couple decades is that whatever the council decides and the community is engaged in, make sure you do that as fast as you can, because people don't, if there's too much time between when you actually do something and when the community or the council decided, then people forget. So we want to be prepared for implementation. If the council decides to do things, these aren't very expensive things. Some of them are more expensive than others, but we think we could, if you decided something, we could get it on the ground within the 6 months to a year to make sure the implementation is as close as possible to the decision. The budget is $200,000. $130,000 of that was from a Measure A grant, and $70,000 is a match using Measure A street allocation dollars. And that brings us back to the objectives. So this is what we hope to accomplish based on the story I've told here today, is first of all, we want to see where the safety issues lie in biking. Where are the problem areas? Derek Bailey, your traffic engineer, is doing a marvelous job already getting ahead of the game and looking at the data record and finding solutions. Then two, what we've talked about, we need to gauge the community's commitment level to bicycling for now and in the future. And then three, one thing we want to accomplish that we really believe is a factor on the roads is to increase awareness of the rules of the road and promote mutual respect between users, the motorists and the bicyclists. We feel like there has been a kind of an us versus them when it's actually just Santa Barbarans on the road. Sometimes you're on a bicycle, sometimes you're in a car. And how could we clarify and hopefully improve safety that way, the different roles on the road and the rules? And then finally, we'd like to bring back a bicycle master plan, a draft to you that reflects the community's input and for both for network improvements and also for safety improvements. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you. We have a number of speaker slips. Any questions first from the council? Mr. Francisco.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Dayton, so in the very beginning of this council agenda report, you talk about 1998 was the last big revision of the bicycle master plan, and that bicycle master plans need to be revised every 4 years in order to be eligible for grants. So how do those two facts work together?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Francisco, we have the option of when we can look at the plan and say, oh, it's still good. In other words, we're still working on the plan we've already made. It's still being implemented, so it doesn't need to be updated.
Okay. All right. So they just take our word for that. What is the actual cost of the community engagement piece? The bicycle master plan updated as a total, you're estimating at $200,000, but what about this piece of it?
We think that different from other plans, usually what we do when we do a bicycle master plan would be similar to other jurisdictions, is you're commonly hiring a bicycle professional. And so it's a little bit, our budget is probably going to be different in that I don't think we're looking for a bicycle professional for this. We kind of already know. We have the professional capabilities in-house to know what the right facilities are. That's not the big question for us. The big question for us is, what does the community think? So we're structuring the budget to be less bicycle professional. You still need those people, but primarily the community engagement. The $200,000 will cover both. So, and we're going to have to really find, that's going to be the challenge for us, quite frankly, is because most of the people we know who we'd send the request for proposals to are bicycle professionals. And we're going to have to do a good job of soliciting community engagement professionals and encouraging the bicycle professionals to partner with community engagement folks, because we just want to make sure that that piece is led by a community engagement specialist, someone who is going to be not as biased. A lot of bike designers are true believers in the bike. You hear we're going to expand the world for bikes, which is great, but that's not really what we want to find out. We want to find out what our community is thinking about it. So I hope I've answered that question.
Well, actually, the question is how big a piece, how many dollars out of the $200,000 will go to the community engagement process?
And I don't think we know exactly. I think, but I think we know that it's going to be more weighted. I would say more than 50% on the community engagement.
Okay, that's good. One of the questions I had just concerned some wording in the council agenda report. I think, was it on page 2? No, page 3. So it said 3 main goals of the 1998 plan. One of them was making a decision to ride. What does that mean exactly?
That means that surveys are consistently saying that there's more people who want to ride than actually do. And so there's real barriers to riding. Some people say, well, it's just not safe. I don't feel comfortable having my kids on the road. And then there's perceived barriers to bicycling. In other words, if you get someone to try it, they go, oh, I can do this. So the invitation to ride is a programmatic approach to encouraging people to actually try it. And that's what Cyclemania has become all about. Ken Epperson of Traffic Solutions is in the room. He may be speaking. He probably could give you some statistics on how successful we think we've been.
Okay, very good. One of the data points that you mentioned in the agenda report is that Santa Barbara is the 8th best city in the United States for bicycle commuting. And there are a lot of cities in the United States. I don't know how many they actually measured. That sounds pretty good. And yet when you look at this bicycle-friendly community report, we're pretty low. they rate us as being 35th percentile in terms of bicycle commuting. So how do those two facts, how can both of those things be true?
It's a great question. So the number 8 is not best, it's most commuters. So people who are going from home to work are doing it by bike. Not the best. So that, and I think what you'll hear from the Bicycle Coalition is, okay, so we have all these cyclists on the road. We're very high in number, but from a facility standpoint, we have this other organization telling us we're silver. So that's the incongruency.
So you're saying then, so I assume there are gold and platinum communities
and
out there in commuting?
Yes.
Okay, good. And then finally, so I looked a little bit at the state's introduction overview about the active transportation program. And one of the goals of that, besides expanding bicycling and walking, one of the goals is improving the safety of cycling. And not to be, this is not meant in a derogatory way at all, but I see a lot of cyclists who pay pretty much zero attention to the rules of the road. And I was driving home last night from a film on State Street, cyclist riding beside me, black clothes, no light, no helmet, in the bike lane on Outer State Street. And I see something like that every day, people cruising through red lights and whatever. So would it be in terms of what the state considers improving safety, would an education program focused on improving cyclists obeying the law, would that be considered something that could be fundable?
Absolutely. And number 3 is one of the objectives. So the $200,000 with the community engagement plan, since we'll be doing a lot of work to get the community's attention. So if we're successful, we'll have it. And then we can talk about the rules of the road and, how do you be more visible? The complaints, trust me, are from both the people who are in cars and people who are on bikes, and that there seems to be, in some cases, some real elevated emotions on the road, and so we're hopefully in this campaign, in this update, be able to address some of that. So not later, but hopefully right now, while we're focused on this conversation.
Okay, thank you very much.
Ms. Murillo?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Dayton, there was talk at one time, or there was some kind of plan to make Castillo Street and Bath Street one-ways above Mission. And this was before I was on the council, and I'm not remembering why that plan was abandoned. And I'm hoping that we can start that conversation. Do you have a comment on that?
Well, Madam Mayor and Councilmember Murillo, I could just tell you that was related to the Cottage Hospital mitigation, and that is just it's just a stalled out effort. The issue we're dealing with, we have some mitigation money from Cottage Hospital in their proposal, their redevelopment.
Great.
And so we've been trying to look for efforts to increase the way the ease at which you go to and from the hospital, which is challenged for all modes. And so that, as a part of that proposal, one of the ideas the consultant came up with those lanes. So that can be revisited in this process, and that would be something that, I think that we're going to be hearing from the community, and people are going to have ideas of what's best and where their needs are. And I wouldn't be surprised if we heard, extend those bike lanes.
So are you saying that it would encourage Cottage Hospital employees to ride their bikes, but then also the people who live in the Oak Park area, that it would encourage them to use the bike lanes if they extended that far uphill?
What we found is anytime you put a bicycle facility that's a little bit more separated from traffic, we have increased and more people being willing to ride.
I know because I've started to ride a bike, and I love it when there's a bike lane. And I do. I'm scared when I'm on Mitchell-Torina specifically. Those of you who drive your cars on Mitchell-Torina, it's pretty tight in there, and you just have to be brave and do it. But thank you, because I would like to, maybe you can dig that plan up for me and email it to me so I can get more familiar with that, those bike lanes extension. Thank you.
Mr. Rouse?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Dayton, in the on page 2 of the CAR, we talked a little bit about the statistics before and the results and how we measure ourselves based on the rest of the nation. And it talks about the data coming from the U.S. Census Bureau. Is that also the data we use to talk specifically about Santa Barbara in the last couple of paragraphs, or the last couple of sentences of that?
That's correct.
The same one. So, so they were able to dig in and find specifically what was going on with Santa Barbara and its commuting, because it was talking about people that were no longer commuting in automobiles, and then it kind of lumps all the transit things together. It doesn't really talk about people that telecommute and do work at home now and do virtual things. And I see Santa Barbara as kind of a unique community in that oftentimes the residential areas and the work areas aren't specifically laid out, and that a lot of people that commute in this town seem to be involved either UCSB or City College. So that would kind of skew the stats a little bit, I would think, in terms of our transit plan.
The stats, is you remember the census used to be a part of that every 10 years, and you'd get the long form. Was the people who had the long form had the most information. Now they don't do that anymore, and they have the American Community Survey, which is taken every year. And the decrease in an automobile could be for a number of reasons. It could be also telecommuters, which aren't included in here.
Okay. And could you, it wasn't included in this report, but I keep hearing talk about the classes of bike lane, like a Class A or a Class B. Could you real briefly define those for me?
A Class?
You had the different examples up on the screen.
A Class 1 is completely separated from traffic and usually is bidirectional. It doesn't have to be.
Be like the shoreline one by Ledbetter Beach?
That's correct.
Thank you.
That's our example. And then a Class 2 is a bike lane, which has a paint separation between the automobile and the bicycle. And then a Class 3 is just a signed route, so there's no separated space. There's a shared, the motorist and the cyclist share the space, but it's routed for bikes. In other words, it says this is a bike route.
Okay, very good. I was recently in France, and I noticed in some of these ancient cities where they're very serious about bikes, and they have bike share programs and so on, but they tend to separate out bike lanes, and they stripe them specifically and arrow them opposite the traffic. I notice we don't seem to do that here. Now, to me, that makes all the sense in the world to ride against traffic so you can see, because I would think a lot of the interface comes between cars and bikes that are in blind spots and trying to share the same thing in the same direction simply don't get seen. Is that something that we do anywhere in the States, or is that something that ever gets talked about?
I'm not aware of any location where we do a bike lane riding in the opposite direction, but as you saw in the Santa Cruz example, where there's a softer barrier, in that example, it's like a small curb, you do have bidirection right next to the road. So with minor delineation, we have that example of riding the opposite way, and it is possible to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Hart?
Well, I'm strongly supportive of this effort. I think this is great.
Before you get to comments, we do have a whole lot of public comment.
I have a question, too.
Okay.
I'm just prefacing it with that to get
All
the
right.
tone in the room.
I know we had you at hello, but
I understand
yes, okay,
completely.
got it.
And the one thing that I'm going to challenge you to do is that, my experience in these planning efforts is that they take a long time. And I think they take too long in the city of Santa Barbara. And I would like you to think about a way to turn this into something that takes less time to get to the finish line. We try to get 100% buy-in on things like this, and we never achieve it. And we spend a lot of time trying to get that last 10% buy-in. And I'm willing to not get 100% buy-in and get something done and get people, what they're after sooner. And I would really, really challenge you. When I see 2016 on this chart, and I'm in 2014. That's too long. That's too long. That's just not. It's not okay. So I would really, you don't have to answer this right now, but I would love to see a plan that delivers this, in the time frame that people operate in their lives. Where they go to a meeting and they say what they want and they get something back and something happens before their kids go to high school. So I'll challenge that.
That was a great question, Mr. Hart. That was great. Okay, let's get to the public comment. We'll start with Robin Elander, to be followed by Omari Fuller.
Mayor, council members, thank you so much. This is really an exciting process because it's you guys have done a lot of work. I want to commend you for your work so far with this bicycle master plan, and this next process just gets us over the hump. In terms of the civic engagement process, specifically in terms of neighborhoods and that element, I would really encourage you to reach out to existing events that are already happening, as well as when you have a neighborhood summit or whatever this looks like, to really create an engaging environment, because there's this social activation energy that it takes to start to get involved with a process like this. And if you kind of get them involved, whether it's through a picnic, a block party, a event that already exists, and then you kind of sneak in some of this other stuff, I would really encourage you to go that way, because there's a lot of good that can come from that, and you bring together a group of people that you wouldn't get otherwise. I also would encourage you to use Open Streets, which many of you are aware of, that I coordinate, as well as a lot of the existing resources you have. And I'm just very happy to serve as a resource in terms of the connections I have to get the word out for you. So congratulations, and I commend you for all your work thus far.
Thank you. O'Malley Fuller, and is Nancy Mulholland in? You're giving your 2 minutes to Mr. Fuller, and then Sam Franklin will be next. So, Mr. Fuller, you have up to 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mayor Snyder, and good afternoon, council members. We are thrilled that you are in this process. My name's Omari Fuller. I'm with the Bicycle Coalition of Santa Barbara, SB Bike. So we're the bike people, of course. We're very excited that you're doing this and taking this on. And I have full confidence in the staff that they are committed to an excellent process to make this a safer, happier, healthier Santa Barbara for all of us. That, I hope, goes without saying. What does need to be said is that we have some concerns, and we hope that will help inform and improve the process. And if I may indulge in a little bit of show and tell, we asked the Santa Barbara Police Department to share a data set with us, which we then put on a map. And this, the red dots on this map represent incidents that were serious enough for the police department to get involved. And so this data set represents over 400 collisions that involved bicyclists in the past 3 years. So basically our beautiful city has been covered.
You can address us up here. That would be, you're on TV, so everyone can see you. So
our
there you
beautiful
go.
city has been covered in red dots. And you talk about a conundrum. I think that Councilmember Francisco summarized it well, that why are we 8th or 3rd in the nation in terms of people commuting or biking, and at the same time we have only a silver rating? Well, this is the answer to that conundrum, that basically, if you noticed on the report, our lowest rating was in engineering. We're basically using outdated infrastructure to commute by bicycle and to ride our bikes around, and that results in this. And data shows that these are all, for the most part, preventable incidents, collisions, and so we would request that, as Councilmember Hart indicated, this is a very long process. If there's a way that staff can and the city can be open to the experiences and feedback of those of us on the ground who are doing the right thing, pedaling every day to save the environment and to get exercise and reducing our traffic load and parking issues, that if there's a way to be open to those concerns in the meantime to prevent these sorts of incidents from happening, that's what we look forward to being able to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Sam Franklin will be followed by Olivia Orfoot.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and council members. My name is Sam Franklin, and you might be able to tell by my accent that I'm not from here, but I'm from Amsterdam in the Netherlands. So you can imagine that I'm slightly used to some higher numbers of cyclists driving around the city. But hopefully we can get to that same point here in Santa Barbara, because the weather is definitely better here. Well, first of all, just like my colleague, I also work for the Santa Barbara Bicycle Coalition, and just like Omari just mentioned, we're really excited that we're finally getting to the point that we're updating the Bicycle Master Plan. One might say that it's long overdue, but let's focus on the positive, and we're happy that it's happening. Especially now, and looking at the figures, that cycling is such a growing way for people to transport themselves. It's not just recreational, but it's actually a valid way of getting to your work, doing your shopping, and more people are traveling in that manner. So it's really important that we facilitate the people using the roads for such a way of transportation. So having just watched the presentation and reading the agenda beforehand, the Coalition really agrees that we need a thorough public engagement process. However, well, especially because once the Bicycle Master Plan is made, we're hoping that it's going to be ambitious and that it'll entail lots of change and create a better infrastructure. So if we want to have public support for those changes, we need to engage with the community. However, it does raise a few questions, and one of the main questions there is we've seen the method, which is about videos and interviewing, but that doesn't really tell us the level of what the public participation is going to entail. How much influence is the public going to have? Is there going to be co-design? Are they going to be allowed to co-decide over issues? Or are they just being heard? Another issue that my colleague just mentioned is the lengthy procedure. We would really like to see changes happen during this whole period. And the very last comment I would like to make is, at first it was the conundrum, now it's changed to the dilemma. We would rather see it as an opportunity, but I would suggest we call it the question, because we're just asking people what they think about cycling. Thank you.
Olivia Orfoot will be followed by Sergio Garcia.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, Council. My name is Olivia. I'm a former SBC student. I'm a bicycle advocate. I'm an intern for SB Bike, and I'm also an intern with the city in the Community Development Department. And so first I want to say I'm really excited to see this progression towards an updated bicycle master plan. It's definitely needed since 1998. Every year I see more and more cyclists sharing the street with me. It's very exciting. I earnestly believe that more cyclists ultimately create a more vibrant and safer street environment. So thank you for that. I do also hope that the city will take this opportunity over the next couple years to maintain the momentum behind the bicycle transportation in the city with infrastructure projects to supplement this study. I agree with Mayor Pro Tempore Murillo and with Councilman Hart that 2 years is a very long time, and in the meantime we do need to focus on our infrastructure to keep up with the fact that Santa Barbara is supposedly number 3 in terms of our commuter numbers, and we need to make it a safer environment for our commuters. I am working on a project with the SB Bike. It's a bicycle network update project for signage. I think this is a perfect opportunity, something that we can do now. Signage hasn't been updated since the last bicycle master plan update in 1998, and it's invaluable to usage. For example, we have a beautiful new bike lane on Cacique, but without clear signage, there's no easier way to discover it. And with bicycle transportation on the ride across the country, and especially in Santa Barbara, we need to update this now to represent cycling's modern place in our society. We ought to have clear, functional signage and wayfinding that encourages bicycle tourism as an economic generator, that guides and incentivizes our ever-increasing bicycle commuter population, and that interfaces readily with other forms of transportation like the MTD and the Surfliner. So, thank you for considering all of this, but I hope this process will inform but also inspire continuing support and infrastructure in our city.
Thank you. Sergio Garcia will be followed by Ed France.
Hello, Madam Mayor and City Council. My name is Sergio Garcia, and I'm a recent graduate of Santa Barbara High School. I'm really excited this bicycle master plan is going on because I think it's very important for there to be safety for the students in our area, especially in the Milpas area where you have two big schools, Santa Barbara Junior High School and Santa Barbara High School. And I think it is very important for those students to have a safe route to get to school because, after all, it is the law to go to school. So might as well give students a safe route to go to school. And I was a former president of SBC, which is the bike club at my high school. And I think what we did there was very important. We encouraged students to ride their bikes to school safe, wearing helmets, also bike lights. And I just feel that we have to do this for the future generation of student cyclists. Thank you.
Thank you. Ed France will be followed by Kent Epperson.
Howdy, Mayor and Council. My name is Ed France. I work for the Bike Coalition as well. I serve as one of your appointees to the Transportation and Circulation Committee. As many of us bikies here are saying, we're excited about the opportunity to have a constructive community conversation about the future of bicycling here in Santa Barbara. A lot has changed since 1998. There's a lot of new tools in the toolbox. In addition to the different types of infrastructure that we've seen, by the way, contraflow lanes is what you're looking for. In addition to a lot of new infrastructure, we have a lot of research and data and comparables. We can be quantitative with bicycling. We can actually do return on investment assessments for our network and to an extent for specific projects. This is big. Bicycling isn't just an amenity. It is a quantitative part of our transportation infrastructure. And that's an important part of the question that we're posing to the community because we can pose the Santa Barbara bicycle conundrum, or we could pose the Santa Barbara bicycle dilemma. But as Sam mentioned, we're looking, the Bike Coalition, at the Santa Barbara bicycling opportunity. How can our system, our transportation system as a whole, operate better for everyone because bicycling is more coherent to users, is safer, and makes more sense for all parties. And we see these things not as either or mutually exclusive, but really opportunities for win-wins. Now, there are trade-offs, but there are also trade-ups, whereas localized decisions will sometimes be difficult when we look at the value of a network as a whole. In our network, we do have 40 miles of bike lanes, but we can't just say, yeah, we're great, we have 40 miles of bike lanes, and because of our great weather, and because we have City College, and because we have UCSB nearby, we have great ridership. Cities that are way colder and have snow have twice the ridership that we have, like Boulder. So while we may be third, we dispiritingly lost the race, or have as yet. So there's still a long way to go, and there's a lot of opportunity, whether you bicycle or not. And as Omari showed with the crash statistics, it is imperative that we address the lack of safety. Now, part of that is current users. The reality is, right now in our system, which is dangerous, risk takers disproportionately ride. And yeah, often they do crazy stuff. I myself am bewildered sometimes. But enforcement, engineering, together we can make this happen. Last thing I'll say, the Bike Coalition has put forth a proposal a few years back now for a bike traffic school. We would love, this came up in the Eastside Neighborhood Transportation Plan. We would love
You're
the
at 3
opportunity.
minutes, so thank you.
you.
Kent Epperson?
I had a question for
Yes,
Ms.
go
France.
up. Well, see, now you can come back.
I can come back.
Mr. Rouse.
You mentioned that you did put a name to my question was about the other. Are contraflow lanes a part of any strategies here in other cities in the States?
Contraflow lanes pretty much exclusively exist on one-way streets where otherwise you wouldn't be able to have access. In our system, it is the safest to ride with traffic. And because no matter what infrastructure we build, for the most part, we're going to share the road for regular lanes like neighborhood, is really disadvantageous to train some people to ride one way and some people to ride the other. And it is statistically safer to ride with traffic.
Thank you. Kent Epperson, and then Kim Stanley, Isabel Green, and Ethan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Mayor. I'm used to addressing the SBCAG board. My name
That'll
is
be
Kent
tomorrow
Epperson.
or Thursday.
That's
right.
true. You are a chair as
Right.
well. And members of the council, my name is Kent Epperson, and I'm the Director of Traffic Solutions over at SBCAG. And we work really closely with the city staff. We've been the ones to put out the invitation to ride. I've done Cyclemania, and we put out the bike map. And what I've noticed over the last 13 years since I've been working on this with the city is we saw this kind of real opportunity initially the first 5 years or so, putting the invitation out. We saw a lot of people that really did want a bike, and all they needed was that prompting, the bike challenge, Cyclemania, that sort of thing. And then we throw bike education out there, and that helps a little bit too. Some additional individuals then take that invitation up. But what I really feel that we've reached at this point is we're now at a kind of a critical point where those that just needed a little prompting to go to an event to get on their bikes, or maybe a little bike education, are riding, to the people that really want to ride but just flat out say they won't do it because it's not safe to ride. And we talk to these people all the time. We work with employers, and I tell you what, I pull out the map and I show them, and just time and time again, that's the response. And we really need to think bold here. We really, in order for the 65% or so of people out there that we've surveyed that say they want to ride, but it's just not safe, they really need improvements. This is exciting times right now. We've got bike planning happening all over the South Coast. Carpinteria, the unincorporated Santa Barbara County area, the city of Goleta, and now Santa Barbara, and also SBCAG is doing its bike plans. We also have this huge opportunity in what we can learn from elsewhere. There's been this huge uptick in amazing engineering and on-the-ground proven results from those new facilities. So I'm just really excited. I also think we have a third really great opportunity, and that is we have a community that's very engaged. And I think we're going to see that during the process. I really like the process that's been mapped out, including the video interviews. We'll be a part of that. We look forward to it. So thank you.
Thank you. Kim Stanley?
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Council. I hope you'll approve the proposed approach for the community engagement process update to the Bicycle Master Plan. If this is the way Santa Barbara can make progress with bike lanes and other facilities, then let's get public input. I work for the Coalition for Sustainable Transportation. I coordinate a program called Safe Routes to School. When a school site wants to look at the surrounding neighborhood to see if there are things that can be done to make this safer for the students who walk and bike, we distribute surveys to the parents prior to that assessment. One of the survey questions is, what affects your decision to not allow your child to walk or bike to school? The 3 reasons that inevitably rank the highest are 1, safety of intersections and crossings, 2, speed of traffic along the route, and 3, amount of traffic along the route. Parents will not allow their children to walk or bike if it is dangerous. I am a cyclist and a mother. My 11-year-old daughter is on the Girls Incorporated gymnastics team on the east side, and we live on the west side. Would I like to bike my daughter to Girls Incorporated? Absolutely, I'd love to. Do I? Absolutely not. Too dangerous. There isn't a safe way for us to get there. There is a need in this town for more bicycle infrastructure. I work, because of the Safe Routes to School program, with a lot of families, and I hear the same thing over and over again from parents. Oh, we'd love to go to the beach on our bikes, but no, we can't do that. I mean, you've heard that from other people in the room, too. So I, too, would like to see a quicker process. It's what seems evident to me, evidently, is not evident to everybody else. So if we pay $200,000 for community input over a 2-year period, and we find that the community is supportive, which I almost assume, I hope that we see some major changes in bike infrastructure in Santa Barbara. Thank you.
Isabel Green.
Madam Mayor and members of the council, I'm not a bicyclist, and I wish I were. I live 3.5 minutes from my work by automobile, and I drive down every morning and back every day. I'm 2 seconds from Alomar Street, which has bike lanes on both sides for part of the way, and the last 2 blocks on Alomar have no bike lanes and no sidewalks, I think, 1 spot. And I will not risk my bones and my body to that street and that pretty heavy traffic and the little part of De La Vina to get to my office. I would love to bike. That's one thing. The other thing, I don't think we should compare ourselves to other cities in the U.S. I think we should look to where the real progress has been made. Somebody brought up the Netherlands, that has hundreds of miles of separate bike lanes. And I understand the reason being that while traffic accidents and deaths are part of our statistical knowledge, Netherlands decided, or I think they felt, that they had zero tolerance for bicycle vehicle deaths, and they made radical changes. So I think we cannot afford to make little changes. I think a master plan is needed. I think we need to think the big picture and make major changes. Thank you.
Ethan will be the final speaker.
Thank you for a very nice presentation. And I would like to point out that the road is access to not just cyclists, but also handicapped persons. Currently, what you have is the road section off, for example, on Anapamu in the morning for about 2 hours, where even a handicapped person cannot park under your current policy to get access to the drugstore and would have to go farther, one way or the other, to make an accommodation for bike lane. And this won't necessarily be represented so with so much emphasis on your survey. And yet it is a demographic that is important for cyclists to consider what is polite on the road or what is appropriate for what the road is available. Right now, you're currently charging fees, fines, and penalties to handicapped people for parking between the hours of 7 and 9, I believe, on Anapamu streets. And that needs to be reevaluated. And I think that's it in regard, if you can just, realize that the road is also, available for people who are handicapped who are not so athletic. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that concludes the public comment piece. It's back to the council. Mr. Rouse.
Question for staff. Thank you, Madam Mayor. And this might be a question actually for Derek Bailey, but Mr. Dayton, if there is a desire to reconfigure a road, to restripe a road, to reduce a lane, to change from two-way to one-way. Are there warrants that need to be determined per when Mr. Bailey often talks about warrants when we go to talk about stoplights or the changing of traffic flow? Can we just by our own volition change something, or do warrants need to be established to do that?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Rouse, that is an excellent Derek Bailey question. I'm not aware of any warrants. I'd be surprised if you said yes, but you are required by ordinance to change the direction of a street, similar to, I think we did Brinkerhoff recently. It is an ordinance change.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Hart?
I think that, following up on my previous not question, I'd like to see this finish in time to inform the next budget cycle, in 2015. And I saw Mr. Casey's eyes roll. This is my philosophy. When I was running for council, I said, the city says things are going to take 2 years, and they take longer than 2 years. And they say things are going to take 3 years, and they take longer than 3 years. So what I'm saying is, you're telling me this is going to take 18 months. Let's do it in half the time that you said it would take. And then that way, when it takes too long, it won't take too long. And so, and this is a cultural thing, and I think this is this is a great question for the council, because this is the kind of thing that we just do this, and we grind these public participation processes, to get to 100% buy-in, and we never get to 100% buy-in. And I know the people in this room know exactly what the challenges are, exactly to the precise corner of the street, and what the decision has to be, to move forward or not. And I don't know whether the council will move forward or not, but I think we can get to that question sooner than what is proposed. And I'd like to know whether we can get 4 votes to do stuff, and I'd like to know sooner than later. And so when it's appropriate for a motion, I'd put that motion on the table with that time frame.
Ms. Murillo?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, I'm supportive of clipping along, but I was going to ask Mr. Dayton, I'm sorry I had to leave the room for a minute. I'm not sure if you talked about regional, you're looking at our bike master plan, but obviously we live really close to Nolita, and people come from Goleta, and I have this wonderful neighbor who commutes from the west side to UCSB every day on his bike. So, I'm just, I'm not sure if you addressed, and maybe that's what Mr. Epperson and his group does, is what are the connectors to Carpinteria and out to UCSB? Our plan, will it include, obviously it would include everybody on the South Coast, or what's the plan for that?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Murillo, the focus is for the Santa Barbara community, but of course there's people in our community that are connecting to the other places of the region, and regional connections, I'm sure, will be a very high portion of the conversation. In other words, those are the places people are going.
Okay, thank you. That was my concern.
Mr. White?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, first of all, I appreciate staff's presentation. This is definitely a great next step, and I do also appreciate the physical pieces that we've gotten to see in this city come into being. Notably, the Ledbetter piece was was one of those pieces where there was a lot of doubt, and there was a lot of controversy, and I think it also, that process that went in, and Mr. Hart, were you on council when that went through? Yeah. So it was, yes. And okay.
I don't hear anybody complaining about this now.
Exactly.
This is one of the kind of things, exactly what I'm talking about, that lots of angst, a decision, no angst.
Okay. Well, I thought that while Plan Santa Barbara was an effort in excessive angst, that was a 10-year. Most cycles of complete redoing of a general plan take 10 years. Well, we took 10 years to do that general plan, and that was too darn long. However, I also know that in this situation, we have a broad range of stakeholders, as we do on this council. And so while I'm open to being ambitious with our schedule, I do not want to cut it off either. I don't want, where we also lose is if we get into backlash and we get into people who feel like they did not get heard. That effort hurts us in a longer term. So I would love to encourage staff to be more ambitious, but I think that what we've got as for a beginning framework is a good one, and I will be supporting that with the encouragement to see if we can get the slopes downgrade a little more and can move it forward a little faster.
Mr. Francisco.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. On a side note, one of the things that I feel that we've always lacked when it comes to transportation, particularly bicycle transportation, is accurate data. So I'm heartened to hear Mr. France tell us that this is all quantifiable, and I will seek him out offline to discuss that in more detail, because I think having accurate, historical, and we better start now, data about cycling is very, very important to making any policy decisions. And also, I guess another side note is that a lot of transportation planning focused on cycling is focused on the commute. And I understand that. Commuting is the holy grail of transportation, because that's when we have our rush hours and that's the maximum capacity time. But I also believe that bicycle commuting is probably going to be a minority interest for a very long time. And people like Ms. Murillo's neighbor who cycles 12 miles each way each day, that sort of thing is a unusual activity. Most bicycle commuters, it has to be in a sort of a 3 to 5 mile range or it's not going to happen. So I would encourage people to focus not so much on commuting, but if you want to encourage people to take up cycling, find easier targets. Stay away from the spinach, which is the bicycle commuting, and focus on the short trip to the store or something else that's doable, something fun a couple times a week. If you want to encourage people to use their bicycles, encourage them to do things that they enjoy doing. Now, as to the process, the so-called community engagement process, having been involved with these processes with charrettes to do this and that for many, many years now, I feel almost clairvoyant about what the results of this are going to be. The results are going to be that the people of Santa Barbara overwhelmingly want more bicycle infrastructure. So I could possibly save the city $100,000 right there. Now, part of that is, if we were here talking today about a gardening master plan, I can assure you this room would be full of people who love gardening. We're talking about a bicycle master plan, so we have a room full of people who love bicycling. And that's great, because cycling is great. But we also want to be sure that we do something that the community embraces and the community supports. So one of my concerns with this public engagement process as it's described is, I can tell you right now, most of the people who show up at public meetings, or a very considerable number of them, are going to be the people in this room or other cycling enthusiasts. And I understand being enthusiastic about lots of different things. I would never, ever discourage that. That's great. But it will not reflect the genuine opinion of the community. My concern is that these series of workshops will inevitably go towards a certain result. And I think I could agree with some of my colleagues who think we can make this shorter. I think we could. And one of the ways to do that, make it shorter and less expensive, is to do a public opinion survey rather than doing all these workshops. I can just tell you right now, because I've been through enough of these, the workshops will advocate for more cycling. And I realize everyone in this room supports that, and I understand that you're coming from that point of view, and that's fine. That's what you should do. But is that really a impartial community process? I don't think so. I think what would be impartial is hire a company that is experienced at doing public opinion surveys and ask them to do a public opinion survey of the people of Santa Barbara, how they feel about this, what is important to them, what kind of bicycling facilities do they currently use, what would they do if X, Y, and Z were available, that sort of thing. If we hire a firm that's focused on that, I think our chances of getting an actual impartial view of what the people of this community believe are a lot higher. And it would be far less expensive. We could probably do a survey like that for $30,000 or $40,000. So my recommendation would be not to do, and I understand what's behind this. Certainly Santa Barbara has a long tradition of getting everybody in the room, or at least trying to. But as I said, I've been through these many times, and they always tend towards a result that is envisioned from the beginning. So, maybe combine the two in some way, but I think a public opinion survey would be far, far more accurate than a series of what will inevitably be advocate-led workshops. So that would be my suggestion. Instead of doing the process that you've outlined, let's do polling. Polling works.
Mr. Rouse?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, as Mr. Francisco was speaking, I kind of thought about the process that we're about to go forward to engage the community about infrastructure. And it's something that can almost have a parallel timeline, because going forth, we're going to be asking people about what they want to do, what they want to prioritize, and there's going to be some big price tags involved with it. And if we are talking about striping and whatnot, no big deal. If we're talking about Class 1, is that the one? There we go. I got that one right. That's a very expensive process. So that would be kind of interesting. In general, I'm in favor of the process the way it is laid out here by staff. And I was encouraged to hear Mr. Franz talking about the safety aspect, because even with the stats presented on the bicycle accidents, there's two people involved here necessarily. And oftentimes it's not just the vehicle. Sometimes it's the other way around. So those stats go both ways. And I know that there are some, as a Mesa resident who actually does ride his bike to work once in a while, and I can ride bike path the entire way to work. But I do see people all the time blow through stop signs, blow through crosswalks that are occupied by pedestrians while other cars are stopped. So there's clearly the individual thing. And as somebody who raised my kids here on these streets and went to local schools, taught them to ride bikes, taught them to walk and be in traffic and eventually to drive, I'm completely irritated all the time by poor on-street behavior, both by by automobiles, by bicycles, and pedestrians that aren't participating in an engaged way. And I would love to have had my kids ride around town the way I got to ride around town in the eastern part of L.A. growing up, but none of us gives our kids the kind of freedom we all had when we were growing up. It's kind of part of the culture now. But I am encouraged by companies like Sonos that are coming online that want to populate the downtown with jobs, use a bike share program, and do a lot of the things that kind of fit the dream of everybody in this room. But like Mr. Francisco said, this is a very partisan crowd, in case anybody hadn't noticed and taken a poll in here. And there's going to be other pushback from the community. So we're going to have to proceed carefully, we're going to have to engage thoughtfully, and we're going to have to get all opinions in. You know, when I was involved in the downtown parking committee system, we were developing Lot 6 and the bike station. Bike station in Lot 6 had been a disappointment. It was free to government employees, county and city. We finally gave up on the county guys. City can still get them. The participation's been low. Now, that same company is going to run the one at Lot 3, which I think is a much better deal because it's going to be at the MTD transit station. So the idea that somebody could come in from CARP with their bike, have a bike locker there, and go to work. Now that makes a lot more sense to me, but that remains to be seen. We have this. If they build it, they will come. But I think we have to proceed, and I appreciate Mr. Hart's frustration with the pace of government, but sometimes we move too quickly. We have a lot of unforeseen consequences. So I will be looking forward to this process going forward. I'd like to maybe engage Mr. France talking about this as our infrastructure concepts develop, because there will be some big tickets depending on what the wish list is of the Bicycle Coalition. So, but I will be supporting the process as laid out by staff.
I wasn't on the council the last time in 1998, but I've been part of the process prior to being on council and now being on 11 years almost, seeing both things happen in that sometimes things take too long and you kind of wonder, well, how did we, what were we really thinking before we started implementing, and that backfiring, and then sometimes trying to cut corners and that having a backlash and actually some becoming a campaign issue, and things change on the council based on some issues. There was one particular appeal hearing I'm remembering that I was on the council at the time, and I think in hindsight the explanation of why certain things were done or not done was truncated in terms of saving time, and that led to people feeling like they weren't heard, and which led to other bad information or different information or debates, and it kind of changed the conversation about it, when in fact I think what we're really trying to figure out here, it's not about how to ride bicycles, it's how can people safely get from point A to point B using all modes of transportation. This is one component of it on a bicycle. So I think there are ways that we can accelerate the timeline or get it so that, for example, during the budget cycle, as Mr. Hart was saying, we could very easily next spring put aside a pot of funding for capital improvements for the fiscal, I guess at that point, 2016 year, ready to go, so we don't have to wait for another budget cycle to actually implement something 6 months after we adopt a bicycle master plan. So that could actually accelerate implementation of something by 6 months. I mean, we already put the money. We don't know it. We won't necessarily know exactly what project it is, but we could put aside $250,000, for example, for something to happen in fiscal year 16. And we know the first part of fiscal 16 will be finishing the planning process, but we know by the end of fiscal year 16 we'll actually implement something. And I was thinking of, as listening to my colleagues and the public here, when Sergio Romero was killed on Milpas Street, 1 year later, we implemented a number of safety components. And it didn't matter if those safety components, whether you were walking, whether you're getting on and off a bus, or if you were driving or on a bicycle. It was a very flashpoint, terrible tragedy that happened, but mobilized all different parts of the community about safety in that area and what was needed. And it was tremendous. 1 year later, not just what are we going to do, it was practically done. And so I think we have the capability of reaching out to more than the usual suspects on something if the request to participate is not just about getting on a bicycle. The request is about how do we make sure that you can get to and from work or school or whatever in a safe manner on all modes of transportation, and we're focusing on this piece. The map of 400 incidents that required police response in 3 years, I mean, that should, I agree with Ms. Green, that should not be tolerated. I mean, that's too many. And regardless of who was to blame, or if it was completely unavoidable, or if it was because the bicyclist was wearing dark clothing and it was nighttime, or if the car driver wasn't paying attention, it doesn't matter. I mean, that is way too many incidents. So there are certain things I think that can happen in conjunction with talking to the community about reducing those numbers of incidents, for example. So just as we have a process in the transportation department about missing links program. It's about sidewalks. Where in the whole city? You have a map. Where exactly in the city are there missing links? The sidewalk just sort of ends and there isn't any, and we prioritize where we're going to fill in those sidewalks. Part of it's safe routes to school. Part of it is frequently used areas. We should have hopefully a map of where are the places where a bike lane just stops or there's some infrastructure piece missing, and have that available to everyone in the community saying, look, here it is where, so if you were to ride a bike to get your ice cream cone or something instead of eating your spinach or whatever it is, and there's a barrier because there's just one block area that doesn't allow you to get to that point, put it on a map, put a pin on it, figure it out. There could be interactive ways to do this that wouldn't have you be required to go to the Franklin Community Center, for example, on a Saturday morning. There's ways to do this social media-wise. There's ways to do this, on the city website that I think will answer Mr. Francisco's question about who's participating in all of this. So I would hope the person that's hired to do the community outreach is good at interacting on a community level at a workshop, but also what are the other modes of communication to get this message out to the full community so that you have a good broad-based participation from all types of residents in the city. So I'd like to know if there are seniors in an area who, for example, may not bike and get scared because bicyclists go too fast down their street, or same with the cars and whatever the reason is. So that to me is one way to try to address the, the perceived or actual bias that might of folks who might show up to a workshop because they have an interest in it already, and try to reach out to more than the usual suspects. Another way I was looking at the timeline. And there are three components of going to boards and commissions, and I think the last one is when they make their official vote. Okay, so that's the last one. But the first two, I kind of wonder wouldn't it be better to have joint meetings? Because I can imagine if you have on the council agenda report the Transportation Circulation Committee, the Downtown Parking Committee, and the Planning Commission. And those are the three that should be part of this process. But if you go to each one individually, everyone's going to have their TCC hat on, or they're going to have their Planning Commission hat on, or they're going to have their Downtown Parking hat on. And really this conversation should be more holistic than that. And having a joint meeting, I think, can help that conversation. And it'll save you 3 weeks, and having to go through each and every commission with their timing and their agendas and so forth. You can have one meeting. It brings a good conversation around. It's another workshop in a sense because it will be open to the public. Might be a different type of meeting than up here on a dais. And then the final one, when they actually have to make their actual vote, then you go to each individual one. But I think that's probably a way you could easily save a month or more because you're doing it twice under this timeline and have a better quality type of conversation and feedback from those commissioners because they'll have to listen to each other. So that would be my other suggestion there. And then finally, I'm hoping that part of the thought process here is not to be so afraid to try something that may require paint or something that's not very costly, and call it a pilot project, call it whatever you want, but it's okay to try something, and if it doesn't work, to then undo it, and call it test it out, as opposed to talking about it for years and years and saying, well, I don't know if it'll ever work. I've heard that way too many times in various situations, and especially when it comes to painting a road, it's pretty easy to change that. So that, I hope, is a philosophy moving forward. So I appreciate where Mr. Hart's coming from of trying to reduce it to 9 months and make you do it. I don't know if I can vote today to say thou shalt finish by June 30th of 2015. However, I think there are ways that we can get to the spirit of what you're talking about. In terms of the budget money, in terms of the boards and commission process, and in terms of reaching out and using social media and the website to our advantage. So those would be my suggestions. I think they fit right in with what you're looking at here. Okay, we have some more lights on. Mr. Hart.
Well, I guess in the spirit of those great suggestions and really the tone of the whole council, I think there's a lot more buy-in to this process than maybe staff was thinking that would be the case. So I think there is some impetus here to move this forward. And in my impatience, I would make a motion to do this in half as much time, but I won't. I'll actually say let's staff, why don't you just come back in 2 weeks and tell us how fast you could do it? If hearing what council's saying, I think the mayor's idea, of concurrent meetings. I think you're surprised to hear a sense of urgency from the council, and I'd like you to use your creativity to come up with take that, chew it over with the consultant that you have about, how could you do this faster, and come back and give us a different option than just what's on paper today. And I'd make that as a motion.
Okay, you said 2 weeks. I'm wondering, it's going to be hard. Well, first, is there a second to the motion?
Sure.
Second. Just a question on the motion and process. It's going to be hard to know the timeline without knowing who we're hiring, and I don't know what your timeline was to bring a contract back, which I think can answer the question. And I don't know if 2 weeks is it or not. Or if it is, great.
I think that's the challenge, is that we don't have a consultant on board to do this, and we've left it. The way we just developed this schedule is mainly based on summer and budgets and the deadline and when people are available, when they're conversing. But what we can do is we do want to get that request for proposal out as soon as possible and get it back to here for contract so that we can move forward. And what I would suggest is that we make that a goal for the people who are hired to tell us. We suggest that there's a part of a goal for this process to do it in a shorter amount of time. The other thing I would say is that this tees us up for the budget process in FY16 neatly. So just because you finish and you know what you want on July 1 doesn't mean it's in the budget. So usually we find out what we want to do, and then we tee it up, and then we have the conversation with the council amongst the whole budget. So that's what I would suggest, to try to shorten the distance of this, see what the people who are good at this can give us in a shorter amount of time that will still be effective.
All right, well, that's rational, and I will amend my motion to be the staff's new recommendation. But with a sense of urgency, because
absolutely
you're getting at this.
Okay, and the seconder?
Yes, I'll go along with that.
Okay. Sure. We still have some lights. Mr. White.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm grateful that those changes occurred, because that's the 2 weeks. I don't think we would need to waste the 2 weeks with this. We can get the RFPs going and all that kind of stuff, for one thing. I'm hearkening back in my mind to the and the points that I think Mr. Francisco's point about needing to have robust participation by all stakeholders is absolutely critical, and that is incumbent upon staff. This thing will rise and fall on that robustness. That's absolutely the case. So incumbent on the great sort of yin yang of Mr. Dayton and Mr. Bailey is a good combination of teammates to make something like that happen, I think. I'm hearkening back to the Schofield Reservoir planning process, and I believe again Mr. Hart was on council on that. It was a gnarly process to take that beautiful little lake up there and make it go away and put in tanks, and then a park which is going to be invaded by us lowlanders, and it was quite a process that went on, that we ended up with a beautiful open space up there and those lovely tanks, but it had very strong community participation. And I can see with the likes of this so-called bicycle master plan, this amendment to our transportation system, what came to my mind was the Las Positas elements. There are places there, and that may be where some low-hanging fruit might occur, and so forth and so on. Our mayor's comments, I thought those were great comments about your experiences with the process, I think, are bringing something together which we haven't done perhaps quite enough of. So I thought those were exciting suggestions, and I also, as I say, I really appreciate Mr. Francisco's comments about we don't want to be blindsided late in this. We want this to be strong from the get-go and all the way through. So I'll be supporting the motion wholeheartedly.
Ms. Muriel?
So did you explain why you're including the downtown parking committee? Is it because I'm sorry, I had to step out for a minute, but because we might be taking some downtown parking for more bike parking? Is that it?
I didn't explain, but yes, that is the answer. They're to do the types of facilities, the modern facilities, the most likely compromise or trade-off is going to be parking, and we feel that we need, that committee also represents a business representation. Mm-hmm. And then I'd just also say, we knew going into this process how this conversation would go. We know that the most important thing is that this council trusts the conversation. That's why we're really intentionally saying that a bicycle advocate will not lead the conversation. We're hoping that they're neutral. They're not the people who run this. The community engagement professionals won't have a dog in the fight, so to speak. Their goal and their eye on the ball is going to be to get the right representation and the right people, and involving the downtown parking committee plays right into that point of getting the business representation involved in this process.
Right, and Cars Are Basic sent us a letter today or yesterday on the subject, so they will certainly have a voice in it. And I've seen online comments. People are concerned about the bicyclists who blow through red lights, and it doesn't seem fair. I know that when I'm on a bike and I'm trying to get some speed to go uphill, I hate that red light because I want to keep pedaling up and go through it, but I stop, just to let you know. And along those lines, I'm hoping that the bicycle community, now that I'm one, if you'll invite me and we can ride along in the difficult places that you'd like to show an elected official. And I would encourage inviting Councilmember Francisco. You were talking about the commute being one thing, and then maybe just riding to get your groceries. I invite you to get on a bike and ride around the community, Dale, because once you do ride your bike around town, you're like, I get it. I get it. I'm 53, and I'm starting to feel older. But when I'm on my bike, I feel like a little girl again. And, even with my helmet, I can feel the wind in my face. And I'm like, I'm free. I'm free of my damn car. And I feel guilty driving my car because, and I'm sorry to be the Debbie Downer all the time talking about climate change. And it's real, and we've got to get out of our cars. And we have a nice small town. And with a little bit of sweat and your helmet, you can get places without being in the car. And I think that's why when the process is over, we will hear that people want more bicycle facilities, is because in our hearts we know we shouldn't be driving our cars every place, especially in a small town like this. And we want our kids, Kim, to ride their bikes to school. What happened to those days? It was a beautiful time walking and biking to school when we were little kids. And the thing about people who don't come out and have their voices heard in these public workshops, the general plan update only, those of us who are land use and government junkies were like, where is everybody? This is a big deal. Even now the drought, there's people who aren't paying attention to the fact that we're having a drought. I don't know I don't know how to reach those people. They live in a different world. And maybe they're not going to come to the bicycle community conversation either. But I trust the process. I'm looking forward to myself being civically engaged in it, and I'm not going to be cynical that these workshops are not going to get us good information. I think people who are dependent on their cars, who love their cars, I think they want to see more cars off the road so they have more room. I think they want people to be using their bikes and the bus. So I support the process, and I look forward to biking with you all, and show me the places where things are really I already have some idea but I'm just getting started. So thank you.
Mr. Francisco?
You have a bike?
Well, Kathleen, I do have a bike. As a former cycling fanatic, I've lived both sides of this world. It's not so practical these days. I wanted to say that, of course, I support the process of updating the bicycle master plan. I think that's a good idea. I still believe that if you want objective information, it should come from a polling company, not from these series of workshops, because I know where these workshops are going to end up. Like I said, I can save you $100,000. I could write the results as this is going to come out of workshops. But clearly I'm in the minority on this. I wanted to make clear, though, that I do support updating the master plan. I'll work with people on that. I won't support this motion because I think this is not the correct way to gauge public opinion, but that's where I am.
Okay, we do have a motion on the floor. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? No. Okay, let's, where are we? 5-1. Okay. Okay, can we take a brief break before we get to the next item? Okay, thank you.
I've grown.
Okay, I'm going to call the meeting back to order. And we have item number 23.
Municipal Code amendments for implementation of Senate Bill 2 related to emergency shelter zoning.
Great. Thank you. Who's Mr. Duarte? Yes, got it. Yeah. Unsueta, sorry. I'll get it. It's a long day. Please begin.
No problem. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and council members. The purpose of today's hearing is to have your council consider amendments to the municipal code related to emergency shelters and also to introduce an ordinance establishing regulations for emergency shelters. Senate Bill 2 was enacted in 2007, and it's intended to encourage and facilitate emergency shelters. All jurisdictions in California are required to have zoning that allow emergency shelters by right. In other words, no conditional use permit or other discretionary actions would be required. The bill also requires jurisdictions to have this zoning in place prior to the submittal of the next draft housing element to the State Department of Housing and Community Development. And ours is due, or we anticipate submitting to HCD in October of this year. During City Council's initial review of this Senate bill, staff brought to your council 2 options that could be considered to implement Senate Bill 2. One was to allow emergency shelters by right in one zone, one designated zone, or to allow it in multiple zones, and specifically in the zones that currently allow overnight accommodations. And this slide shows those zones. Council unanimously voted to direct the preparation of ordinance amendments to implement this approach, and also to have the ordinance committee and the planning commission review the ordinance amendments. This map depicts the zones that allow overnight accommodations or hotel uses. So these were the zones that were directed to be part of the ordinance. As staff began to prepare the ordinance amendments, we became aware that there were some zones that were or might be inappropriate to include as part of this ordinance. The HRC 1 and 2 are problematic because they would require the Coastal Commission certification or approval, I should say, and due to the local coastal plan update, which is anticipated in 2 years, or at least the certification at Coastal Commission, this would be problematic for the zoning or the amendments to the zoning ordinance because we have to have our zoning in place by the end of the year. The RH is specific zoning to the El Encanto Hotel, so it basically encompasses the El Encanto, and so there are not adequate parcels to be able to utilize this zone as part of the emergency shelter zoning. The OC and the OM1 do allow hotel use, but they allow it with a conditional use permit. So it doesn't allow it by right, and therefore would be unsuitable for the purposes of this ordinance. And also there's a timing problem because of the LCP update. And then the M1 zone is potentially incompatible with the emergency shelter use in that it would not be suitable due to the heavy industrial uses that may be sited near an emergency shelter. So we're recommending that be removed from consideration. Now this map depicts the zones that are recommended for emergency shelter zone. And as you can see, we've removed the coastal zones in this area, the M1 zone, which was here. So although the zones have been reduced in the number, they still would adequately meet the need of the homeless shelter. In that originally we had proposed a CM zone, and the state did certify our housing element and agreed with us that we had sufficient parcels in place or zoning in place and the capacity. So we are confident that with the additional zones that we're proposing, we'd meet our need.
We have a question, Ms.
Yes.
Mario.
May I ask if you could point out where Casa Esperanza is? And do you know off the top of your head what the zoning is there?
Yes, I do have a map of it. I'm going to get out of this for a little bit. Casa Esperanza is right here. And I believe that it's a dual zone, M1, OM1. So it is currently in this coastal zone, and it does have dual zoning.
Well, or Mr. Casey, would we get in trouble? Would it give Casa Esperanza a challenge if we went ahead with this and said shelters shouldn't be in a zone like that? And there our shelter, our well-used shelter is right there.
Madam Mayor and Councilmember Murillo, Casa Esperanza operates under a conditional use permit. And so they've already had that approval in place. And it was that requirement of a conditional use permit that made that zone not applicable for what we're trying to accomplish here, which is to allow some overnight accommodations by right without the requirement of a conditional use permit.
I'm just paranoid. Do you understand? And trying to protect Casa Esperanza's status. Thank you.
The proposed zoning amendments entail the following. It adds a definition of emergency shelters with minimal supportive services, and it also reflects the parameters of those services. It adds Chapter 28.79 to the Municipal Code, which establishes the zones for the emergency shelters. And it also adds to the permitted uses section of each of the identified zones the emergency shelter as a use. So it would be identified as a use in the zones that we are recommending. And also the conditional use permit chapter of the Municipal Code would be amended to clarify that emergency shelters or homeless shelters with more than minimal supportive services, such as Casa Esperanza, Rescue Mission, would require a conditional use permit. SB 2 does allow the application of standards. They are very specific, and they are to be, or they should be intended to encourage and facilitate emergency shelters. They should not impede the shelter's development or operation. In other words, they shouldn't be so cumbersome, restrictive, or or onerous so that an emergency shelter could not develop or redevelop into an existing building. And also the standards that are applied should also be comparable to the standards that we would apply to other uses in the same zone, such as the lot area and height and setbacks. These are on this slide are the standards that the law, or SB2, indicates that jurisdictions can apply to emergency shelters. We can regulate them based on these particular issue areas. And the the proposed ordinance has used these particular standards, and we've identified them, and I will go through them in detail. With respect to capacity, the R4 zone would allow a maximum of 50 beds, and it would also allow no more than 50 homeless persons to be served per night. In the commercial zones, the maximum would be up to 100 beds. Again, no more than 100 homeless individuals would be served per night. The length of stay is 6 months or less, and this is according to state law. With respect to intake and waiting areas, the proposed ordinance indicates that at least 10 square feet of floor area per bed should be dedicated to intake and waiting areas, and also that these areas must be provided in the building. Outdoor areas and activities, they would be screened from public view. Also, queuing in public right-of-way or parking areas would not be permitted, and the outdoor activities or policies of these type of activities would be addressed in the management plan that is required of emergency shelters. When we were before the Planning Commission, initially staff proposed that parking standards or parking numbers would be provided based on parking demand study for each individual emergency shelter. The Ordinance Committee agreed with this. However, when we were before the Planning Commission was concerned that homeless shelters providers or the providers would, have possible financial difficulty with preparing a demand study, and so the direction from the Planning Commission was that the staff should try to develop a parking standard for emergency shelters. Currently, our zoning ordinance does not provide a parking standard for such facilities. So transportation staff did have the opportunity to review parking counts for Casa Esperanza, and specifically during the winter months, which we believe are the months that are the most used. They are allowed the most beds at that time. And so based on these counts, the parking standard is being proposed to be 1 parking space per 10 beds, and also 1 parking space for each employee and volunteer during its largest shift, and 1 bicycle parking for every 4 beds.
We have a question from Ms. Maria.
Yes.
So why would they use the standard of the winter shelter when there's the most bodies there? I'm not sure that I support this, and I'd like to just let my colleagues know that, I might argue against the Planning Commission's recommendation on this. And can you tell us what would be the benefits of the other way, which is the original proposal of there being, is it called a parking demand study?
Yes.
So
I'll let Mr. Foley respond to your comment.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor, Council, Murillo, The benefit here really would be that by coming up with a standard of which they have to meet, as opposed to having to do a study every single time, is basically just the time and money that's involved with doing those studies. Is that what you're...
Well, I just don't see, 10 entities stepping forward to make homeless shelters. I mean, you're arguing you're saying that, it's going to save time. I just don't see a whole lot of applications to make new homeless shelters in Santa Barbara. But that's your reason, is that it would save time.
Just Madam Mayor and Council Murillo, specifically, it was just from the request from the Planning Commission that we look at it this direction. I think you could just very easily say, let's have them do a traffic study with each individual one. Either one would work.
Okay.
I think you're looking at it opposite from what the intent of the Planning Commission was. I think the Planning Commission was trying to say, instead of having the shelter applicant go through the time and expense to put together a parking study, let's give them some basic guidelines. If they want something different, they can still go through the parking study. But this is a way they can just go right through, and if they feel like that doesn't work for them, they can still be provided based on a parking study. But going back to what the Ordinance Committee says, they have to do a parking study no matter what. Okay. Am I understanding what the process was
Madam
there?
Mayor,
That's correct.
That's absolutely the way it worked. The ordinance as presented to the Planning Commission included essentially a parking study for every application. The Planning Commission tasked staff before coming back to the City Council with coming up with a parking standard that could apply and would not require a parking study for every single application. As Madam Mayor mentioned, if an applicant wished to provide less parking but could justify the parking that they could provide with a parking study, they could go that route. It's an alternative to the parking standard.
Which actually helps
I'm
the
satisfied with that answer. Thank you.
I do have a question, though, on this about volunteers, because, I mean, staff, it's a pretty static number, more or less, month to month. Volunteers could be all over the place. They're there for half an hour or a couple of hours. I mean, we're saying every single volunteer, if they're there for, I mean, how do you enforce that or figure that out? And it changes from month to month. There might be an event that's happening that needs volunteers. I'm not quite sure how that part works.
Madam Mayor, I think what we would be looking from the provider is what they anticipate is their largest shift. So if they anticipate, and obviously this could be a little difficult, but from looking at, say, an economic downturn, that they anticipate a larger shift, they were going to have 5 employees, they would set aside 5 employees and volunteers for that, and the rest would be 1 per 10 beds. Now, for the rest of that time, it may be they only have 2 people at night, and so at those times, it's possible that there are times that there will be more parking than is required.
So volunteer, you're not talking every single individual who volunteers at any time to get their own parking space.
That's correct. It would be the largest shift.
Would be the shift in what they typically see. Okay, it's still, that's better, but I'll let it go. Okay, thank you.
And as the mayor indicated, if the provider wanted to provide fewer parking spaces as opposed to what the standard is requiring, then of course a parking study would be prepared that would demonstrate that, and that would be the flexibility. Lighting. Emergency shelters would provide adequate external lighting consistent with the city's outdoor lighting ordinance to ensure safety for the outdoor areas. Also, with respect to concentration of uses, no emergency or homeless shelter shall be within 300 feet from another, and this is per state law. We cannot require that they be more than 300 feet from one another. And as indicated here, that would include existing shelters. And this is the slide that we previously viewed, but I put it in because Councilmember Murillo asked about where our existing shelters were and how this 300-foot buffer relates to the proximity or the concentration of uses. And so as you can see by this particular slide, we have Casa Esperanza that's located in this area, Rescue Mission, Transition House, and then there's a small facility here called Noah's Anchorage. It's really small. It's for youth, and it, I think, provides about 20 beds. But
you're also missing the Salvation Army.
Right, and the Salvation Army we did not include because it is a little different with respect to the definition. It's more of a transitional type housing. It requires their residents to be there for 2 years, to commit for 2 years, and it also sometimes charges for their service. But we've also identified the 300-foot buffer here in this light green so that you can have a reference as to what that means in terms of distance. I think there was a concern that maybe 300 feet could compromise the ability to provide or develop more than 1 or 2 shelters in an area because of the requirement. But as you can see by this slide, there is quite a good amount of space where other facilities could be developed. The emergency shelters would also be required to provide an on-site management plan, and it would also require that management personnel would be on site at all times. And this management plan would be submitted and approved by the Community Development Department Director. The areas that would be addressed through the plan would be such things as hours of operation, security, neighborhood relations, where the cooking and dining facilities would be or what the policies might be for those, shower, laundry facilities, and smoking areas. And also we added this ability to pay. It's actually part of the definition of emergency shelter, but it indicates that you cannot be denied shelter due to an inability to pay.
Mr. Rouse has a question.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So these facilities can't be subject to a conditional use permit, but there's an approved management plan. So I'm a little shaky on the distinction between a CUP and a control management plan, and we would have the ability to enforce if that management plan were not lived up to. Am I understanding what's going on?
The law is not real specific about how we would enforce that. It does indicate that we, as a jurisdiction, could apply this type of a standard and require a management plan. The Community Development Director would approve it, and presumably at that time would look at the policies that are part of that plan. Whether we would be able to enforce it in the future, that's not clear.
Yeah, because I mean that's an issue that has come up in our past history. So I was, the way it's spelled out, it sounds reasonable to me, but I'm kind of wondering the practical application, how that. Like I said, just the distinction between a CUP and a enforcement. Mr. Ledbetter, you had a...
Yeah, Madam Mayor and Councilman Rouse, I guess the main distinction is that one has a permit and one doesn't. A use permit is a formal permit that you can enforce on, and this is really effectively, we're looking at the standards that are laid out by the state. These are the things that we can look at. Do you or do you not meet these standards? And it's basically an approval. I mean...
But if it be turned into the Wild West, would we have the ability to say you can no longer operate here as a shelter?
That's kind of the point of it. Is no. That question would be no. That would be a use permit, and if they're meeting the standards, presumably, if it was turned into the Wild West, there would be other things that they would be breaching if it was noise or loitering or whatever, but
well, that was my second question, was then all the rest of the city ordinances then would apply, all the nuisance ordinances, other, you mentioned lighting up there, so that would be
absolutely
still be in play.
Yeah, and there was actually a fair amount of discussion at the Planning Commission about the one particular item about noise and whether we needed to further regulate outside noise. And ultimately, it was decided that no, we have these ordinances that are on the books now, and we would enforce those ordinances. There would be no need. And in fact, that might be counter to the state law to create a new means of enforcement.
And if, for example, there's a feeding or some kind of food preparation capacity at these, which I assume there would there be a restriction as to who was able to come by and be fed? Would it be restricted to that, or is that part of that management plan, or is that still, because once again, that became an issue?
That's very clear about minimal services, and they specify, the state specifies that you're providing minimal services for those, basically your clients, and so you're not bringing in other people just to feed them from that kitchen facility.
So you've got 50 beds, you feed 50 people, not 200 people.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Hart?
So let me just get the 40,000-foot picture of this. The state is concerned that many communities around the state are not stepping up and doing their share of providing emergency shelters. So they say we need a state law that says you have to do this. And so in contrast to that, in our community, we're doing a great job of this and have been very, I think, aggressive about doing that. So now we're caught in this state regulatory framework. And our experience has been that having a conditional use permit was actually kind of important to the successful operation of our shelters. But that tool is no longer available to us at all. And we have to conform to these state regulations that basically say you don't have a role to play anymore in regulating these things, except through this management plan that may or may not be enforceable.
Madam Mayor and Councilman Hart, that's a yes and no kind of answer on this one because, for example, we do have a use permit in place for Casa Esperanza that still stands, that's still valid. We still enforce on that. So this process doesn't negate that in any size, shape, or form. It's really all about kind of like the arena process for the housing element, establishing that you have the capacity to do that. Now, in terms of future enforcement of those, basically, if they come in and meet all the standards, then they can have a homeless shelter. But that doesn't negate any of the other regulations that you have or ordinances that you have on the books.
It's clear as day. Okay, I think that's what I asked. Thanks.
And one more point. One more point is, if a shelter is going to come back, and this is an important one, and provide more than quote minimal services, and it goes back to Councilman Rouse's point, then at that point you can require a use permit. So if you're going to be providing social services, counseling, drop-in food kitchens, that kind of thing for not your clients, at that point then you can require a use permit, and they're very clear about that.
That's very helpful, thank you. But ironic, let's see, put the map back up actually.
I'm sorry, which map?
The map that had all the zoning areas.
It's with the shelters.
With the shelters on it, yeah.
What's that for? Oh, okay.
All right.
So Casa Esperanza and the rescue mission are not even in the zones we're talking about, right? So does that mean we get to have conditional use permits in those areas? Okay.
Yes.
That's what I need to know. Thank you.
Does Transition House and Noah's Anchorage have conditional use permits, and will those stay in effect?
Transition House does not have a conditional use permit. Noah's Anchorage does, and they will stay in effect. They all will stay in effect.
Okay. Mr. White?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So the CUP process for Casa Esperanza, is that a citywide CUP? Does that apply to certain zone districts? What's the how are those things connected?
Madam Mayor, members of the council, CUPs are site-specific. So Casa Esperanza has a conditional use permit
Correct.
for their current location. They can't move it to
I
another
understand.
location.
But my point is, my question is, I mean, in some CUPs, you can have a church throughout the city of Santa Barbara with a CUP, shall we say. Can you have a homeless shelter throughout the city of Santa Barbara subject to a CUP, or is it to specific zone districts?
The conditional use permit section permits a shelter or a quasi-public facility. That's what Casa Esperanza was treated as. And it is not specific as to which zones it can or cannot, but it would require a conditional use permit.
Okay, thank you. And so we've satisfied the state's requirements by going with the CM zone to begin with by right. So that we have that, and that's the state's requirements. And now the ordinance committee is suggesting that we should expand that right to a much larger area. And then, so no CUP, whereas it's always been there that a CUP process could be there to keep things under stronger control, but that didn't work for the ordinance.
Madam Mayor?
I'd appreciate hearing more about that from the ordinance committee.
Councilmember White, the initial direction from your council was that we look at all the zones that allow overnight accommodations, not just the CM zone, but all the zones that were listed previously.
Is that go ahead, Ms. Murillo.
To address Councilmember White's concern, we believed that some of the shelters that are already located are concentrated in that area, and that to give more space, more opportunities for sites so that the impacts of admittedly a difficult population to deal with would be spread out in other parts of the city. That was our thinking.
Does the law says, so if this is never going to happen, so I'm just going to put out a hypothetical, it's not going to happen. If there were 20 organizations that wanted to do emergency shelters in the city without a CUP, do we allow for 20, or does the law say you can have one?
You can allow for 20.
You can allow for 20, okay. So, okay, then my next question then, the warming centers. Is that an example of currently of what we're talking about, or is it because they're in churches, is that a whole separate entity?
The intent is to have a year-round facility. So the fact that the warming shelters are usually during inclement weather, they would not really be. They wouldn't fall under the definition of
whole different thing.
Yes.
So okay. So then, because there could be 20, not that there's going to be, because that's just not going to. It's just not feasible. I think what I'm understanding the ordinance committee process is that you wouldn't want all 20 in just the CM zone, right? If that, so that way you're spreading it out, so you're not concentrating a number of them. I mean, in reality, it's just not going to happen. But okay. I'm just trying to wrap my head around this hypothetical state mandate that's just not going to happen, but we have to do an ordinance anyway. But it could.
I'm still struggling. So to meet the state law, you need to pick one zone, and you need to say you can do this without a conditional use permit. Can we still have a conditional use permit process for the other zones in the city?
Yes.
Yes, we do.
So state law does not bind us. Well, then I don't understand why I wouldn't just do what the state law minimally requires and trust our process to do the right thing, which is what we've been doing all along.
I think the answer is that if a shelter wanted to do more than the basic services, they have to get a conditional use permit no matter what, right? So shelters that we find are probably going to do more than basic services year-round. So that's why, so we don't have to worry about getting a whole bunch of organizations that want to do something without a conditional use permit, because they're probably going to want to do more than the minimum that would require them to get a conditional use permit. And then the flip side is why expand it beyond the CM zone was that if there were the scenario of multiple organizations wanting to go somewhere without a conditional use permit, you don't want to concentrate them in just one part of the city.
But they could do that on their own. Those 20 could just choose to be wherever they want to be.
No, they'd
in
be
the
forced
CM
to go.
zone.
If we're saying there's only one zone you can go without a CUP, then they're going to be forced just to go in that area. But this
I
ordinance
see
would
what you're
allow
saying.
them to
But-
go other.
Or they could all choose to be in the CM zone too.
Correct.
And
That is true.
and we couldn't say anything about that. Whereas
Well, that is a point. You are trying to get into the mind of Sacramento, and that's, I know,
it's
difficult.
not a scary thought.
Madam Mayor.
So I think
Madam
I
Mayor,
understand what this is about.
And Councilmember Hart, within the hypothetical that you're posing, if there are multiple emergency shelters within the CM zone, within the same zone, they still would be subject to the 300-foot separation. So it would, as a practical matter, they probably couldn't get more than maybe 10 at the most. We wouldn't get to the 20 scenario, but that is one of the points behind that 300-foot separation between facilities.
I guess what I'm concerned about is I think that we do a good job of regulating this. I think that providers have done a good job of providing this. I'm supportive of this. I will always be supportive of this. But I'm concerned about somebody that is just outside of the system, that isn't a nonprofit, that just decides, I want to do something, and this is the way I want to do it, and I'm wealthy enough to just do it. And I'm just going to do it where I want to do it now in this expanded area, and that we have no tools to regulate that, and that they're not doing it properly other than through this management plan that I don't have any confidence that we have actually the ability to enforce. And I don't believe that having the police department citing people for being too noisy is a good way to do that. So I guess at the bottom line, even though I'm supportive and I've voted for, I think, just about every single one of these facilities and would do it again, I don't think we should expand this beyond the minimum state law requirement. That's my sense.
Mr. Rouse.
Well, thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, going back to the logic process of the ordinance committee was, like Ms. Murillo said, was to avoid a concentration. We do have a history of having an area that got blighted by the mismanagement of one facility, and that was rather unfortunate. So taking that lesson to heart, number one. But number two is to say, rather than have fewer bigger shelters, if it came down to maybe we'd have smaller shelters, more dispersed, if it came down to that. But my question was this: within the CAR, it talks about a community's capacity or community's need to do this, and it talks about how we may have already met these requirements. Now, what are the parameters? How is our capacity defined? What are requirements said to do? And how do we determine whether or not we're already there? I mean, to me, if I read the CAR and understand the process the way I do, we've kind of gotten there. And I'm kind of wondering, when do we get the good housekeeping seal of approval, and maybe Mr. Kahlon can dive into that one for me.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Rouse, I think that the ordinance adds regulations to a process that's already there. In other words, I think the CAR says that there are a number of overnight accommodation zoning districts that currently would allow emergency shelters as of right. What this ordinance is doing is adding restrictions to how those emergency shelters can operate, and the ordinance takes the full scope of authority the state has left to you and applies it. So the CAR's reference is really saying that you've got a hole in your rules that we're trying to address through this regulation.
All right, very good.
But I'm thinking that, for example, on parking requirements, that the parking requirements for the overnight accommodations would blow a homeless shelter out of the water. It's like one parking space per unit.
Correct.
So if you want 50 beds, you're going to have to provide 50 parking spaces plus staff. So there'd be 75 parking spaces for a homeless shelter. I'm saying that what Mr. Kahlon's point was that there's a hole in our process now which would allow homeless shelters, and I'm saying I'm not sure that there is, because the restrictions, the standard, the performance standards for allowing that overnight facility would have standards, parking standards, for example, that would not allow, would be inappropriate for a homeless shelter. So
Madam Mayor,
that couldn't work.
White, I may get out of my depth here in a hurry, and if so, Mr. Benson will reel me in. If I understand correctly, the parking requirements that you're adding are
But what's on the books now is my point.
Is tougher than what you're adding. That's correct.
So it would prevent a homeless shelter from going into that spot because they can't provide the parking that the current standards.
And that liberalization came as a result of the Planning Commission's recommendation.
Okay.
The staff came in asking for parking studies for every application.
Okay.
Okay, you had one more.
I guess okay.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
mean, just because I, like Mr. Hart, have worked on, I don't recall working on the Noah's Anchorage project, but I worked on every single other of those projects and supported them. And I'm also a real fan of conditional use permits. I'm still struggling with why are we fixing something that isn't broken.
Go ahead, Ms. Murillo.
The way I see this is the state knows that generally local people don't want homeless shelters, so they're trying to make it easier for a homeless shelter to go in. Just the way the state said, local governments, we can't say no sober houses, because then it takes the burden off of us, and we say, this is the state, going for the greater good. So I like the more zones, because if you look at it purely from, we may need more homeless beds in the future, this is a way to get there. And there's more opportunity spaces, and it would decentralize the zone of homeless services. So that's why the state is doing it, is to take the burden off of us.
And we responded by providing the CM zone as a zone where it can happen by right. Having already provided an opportunity, frankly, you could put sounds like we could put a homeless shelter in a single-family zone at this point with a conditional use permit. It's subject to everybody voting for it. But is that right?
With a conditional use permit, theoretically, yes, but it wouldn't happen.
Well, okay. Anyway, it's just we have shown our good heart by approving, not only approving, but funding, spending a lot of money, investing millions, $1 million, $2, $3 million, whatever the city invested in Casa Esperanza to have it be there, and struggled with it, but I think struggled with it in a constructive way over the decades to make it help make it more compatible with the neighborhood and make it work better, which it is now than it was. It's had its nadir, and I think it's doing better. So I'm still struggling with why we're broadening this.
Well, and it's always difficult to be thinking hypothetically about a mandate that's not going to, there's no application, this is just, it's like the regional housing needs assessment. It's on paper. And maybe it'll happen, maybe it won't. I'm hearing both sides very well. We need 5 votes to adopt this, right? And I know Mr. Hotchkiss, according to the CAR, he was leaning towards the CM zone, which is what I'm hearing Mr. Hart saying. Yeah. So, and Mr. White's on the fence on it, right? So I'm just putting that out there. I get why would we do more than what the state's mandating us to do. That's a compelling argument. I also hear the argument of, well, if this city needed to open up so many more shelter facilities, we have more trouble than we think, because that's not the trajectory of where we want to go dealing with homelessness. It's not about emergency shelters. It's about housing first and a whole bunch of other things. So, yeah. Okay, Mr. Rouse.
Well, one other piece, Madam Mayor, of the distribution of the wider process was not to basically, quote unquote, condemn one zone or one area to say we're going to lay this all on you folks down there in the CM. It's a community-wide issue, it's a community-wide concern, and it was like, why are we going to concentrate this all down there? No matter where you put this, you're going to have controversy. It's like you said, it's hypothetical. We're in the minds of our colleagues in Sacramento, but that was part of the logic why we just didn't want to take one zone. Yeah,
Mr. Francisco.
So, Madam Mayor, clearly we have the most abundant homeless facilities of any place in Santa Barbara County. There's absolutely no question about that. This law was not meant to deal with us. It's not going to apply to us. And whether we put it in one zone or 10 zones, we're not going to see any of these. So I will support whichever position has majority support because this isn't going to happen.
Right. Yeah. Well, I agree. I agree with you there. I think we're talking in hypotheticals. So I guess Mr. White and Mr. Hart, and I guess if there's a strong, you can debate more, multiple, or one. Ms. Murillo.
Madam Mayor, I'd like to make a motion as a member of the Ordinance Committee who did their due diligence on this subject.
And read the report.
I'm respecting the Planning Commission's changes, even though I disagreed with Commissioner Jordan on the 10 by 10 foot waiting area. I'm going to respect the Planning Commission's changes, and I'd like to move the proposal with that's on the screen there with more
as presented.
As presented.
Okay. The staff recommendation. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Moved and seconded. Anything on the motion? All right. Well, we'll see where this goes. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. So that is 4-2, and I don't think that is going to fly, given Mr. Hotchkiss's. So
I'll move that we limit it just to the CM zone.
There's a second. Second. Okay. You understand why it was a 4 vote here, but in order to adopt it, we need 5 votes. And Mr. Hotchkiss has been on record opposing the motion that you presented. So we won't be able to adopt it.
So there's going to be 5 with my no vote because I don't want to be a flip-flopper on this one.
Okay. Well, we'll find out. So like I said, I go with where. All right. So the motion now is it's as recommended, but just for the CM zone. Are we including the other portions of the Planning Commission?
Yes.
All right. So the only change is just to limit it to the CM zone. And we have a second. Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
No. Opposed.
Oh, okay.
Oh, no.
All right.
Deadlocked.
So now what? So where do we go from here?
I'd like to ask the people who voted against my motion if there was something we could do to get to a yes vote. Councilmember White,
Mr. Hart and Mr. White.
You were on the Planning Commission for a long time, and how do we?
Let's have it come back with another council member.
One suggestion would be to take away the Planning Commission recommendation about the parking, which would make it more difficult in some of the other zones, but you allow the multiple zones as a place without a CUP.
That's one idea.
Which was the original recommendation from the Ordinance Committee, right?
Right. We had recommended the planning, the parking demand study option.
Right.
But what if, Madam Mayor, we look at the map and we delete some of the zones? I mean, that would be the way to split the decision, right? So include the CM zone as...
Well, my suggestion about the parking is, going back to what Mr. White was saying, was that the Planning Commission recommendation would make it easier for someone to go in these multiple places without a CUP because they'd be able to meet the standard. And you're saying, and by deleting that, then I think I'm getting to what the crux of Mr. White was saying is why make it easier to have someone not have a CUP beyond what the state is requiring? And so it'd be hard to go through exactly which zone here and just pick one off, to tell you the truth. But I don't know, unless you have some other idea, Mr. White.
That's where I'm going. I just feel like it's expand the area modestly. The CP is the next smallest chunk. I just feel like the CUP process works pretty darn well. It's worked for the other ones. We have all of the South Coast homeless beds, and that shows our goodwill. And so I'm struggling with.
Mr. Hart, do you have
Is there a deadline? Can we table this to when we have a full council?
The only deadline here is that we can't really move forward with the housing element submittal to HCD until this is resolved.
Is there a deadline to that?
We're looking at.
I guess I'm just asking. Councilmember Hotchkiss is going to be here next week, right? We'll have 7 council members. Is that?
We continue this to next week?
Yeah.
Sounds like we need to.
If we had 7, we'd have 5.
Well, we hope. Yeah, I guess we would have to have at some point. We'd have to have 5. Mr. Kalan?
Mayor, just procedurally, I wanted to make sure that if you closed the public hearing, that you reopen it and continue it.
You're suggesting we should close the public hearing?
No,
or should
no,
not?
saying
Should not.
in order to do that, we need to reopen it and continue it.
I assume you opened and closed the public hearing.
I
didn't hear.
did. We didn't have any speaker slips because this is such a non-issue.
So my advice would be to, if you are going to continue it, before you continue it, reopen the public hearing.
Okay. All right. So it sounds like the consensus is to put this on next week's agenda. Mr. Rouse?
Just closing comment. I just to go back to when we talked about CUPs and where the things are now and the history of the CUP. If we concentrate this, and this was part of the thinking, in an area, the stakeholders down there would, even though Mr. Francisco is right, this is likely not going to come to fruition. But I can also see the pitchforks and torches from the stakeholders down there having gone through what they went through before. So that's one reason why this concentration and picking one area in one zone is inherently unfair. So I'm just not sure that works out, even though, like you said, it's probably never going to be an issue.
Okay, Mr. White?
Then is there a motion required to continue this?
Yeah, a motion would be to continue the public hearing and place this item on next week's agenda.
Second.
Was that all? Okay. Any other comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Opposed?
Oh, okay. All right. We'll try again next week. All right. We have a couple of closed sessions. Oh, sorry. Any council member committee assignment reports? Ms. Murillo.
Thank you. A couple of Milpas area related announcements. I attended the Milpas Community Association celebration. They won a neighborhood improvement award. Also, The Habit, which is on Milpas and other areas of Santa Barbara, won the best tasting hamburger in Consumer Reports. But it was sort of a double celebration down at the old post office on Milpas, and a couple of other of us were there. And very nice party, good food, and DJ music. I also attended the Milpas Action Task Force meeting. There continues to be approval of Casa Esperanza's new sober requirements and the operation and impacts down there, and that reflects somewhat on our last item. Still, there's people down there abusing their medical marijuana privileges, and apparently they gather and smoke, and it's a law enforcement issue, and there's some crime related to some of the RVs down there. It's been a little while since the 4th of July. I wanted to congratulate the spirit of 76 organizers, because it was a nice parade, and I was interested to hear that there were some issues from the hot dog man, Billy Connell, that there was some illegal vending, and of course we are sorry that our fireworks show had some glitches, but it was beautiful, what was there, and some of us are grateful for what we had, even though there was some mistakes. But while I have the mic, Mr. Casey, if we could follow up on what happened with the food vending down there, it seems like something happened that we should at least know if there were some illegal vending issues. Thank you.
Mr. White.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, as Mr. Hart mentioned, that I had attended the Water Commission meeting yesterday, as did he, and it was a very full agenda. We heard, of course, the parks material, but also there was a contract for services to update the sanitary sewer management plan. There's a little disconcerting rise in SSOs, which is Mr. Toth is helping us deal with there and needing to get more data management. Another piece is there's an increase in contract services for reactivation of the Charles Meyer desal facility. And finally, a contract for drought-related water rate modeling services having to do with having another Prop 218 set of rates having to do with the desal plant, which hopefully that actually can be expanded still further, and I'll be talking about that some other time.
Okay, thank you. We have a couple of closed sessions.
Item 24, conference with labor negotiator. And item 25, public employment, public employee appointment.
Thank you, and we'll be adjourning from closed session.
And start